Chapter 759. Until they returned, Duga Cho, a pinnacle expert who had been unrivaled in this world for centuries, was still in a daze. The three of them had traveled much faster than the rest. In addition, the three of them were preoccupied with their own thoughts, and did not speak along the way. Yin Yang was counting his gains, reveling in them as he did so. His heart and mouth were beaming with joy, his face glowing as he walked. Ling Xiaozui was also combing through his gains. His improvement this time was significant, equivalent to at least half of a 60-year cycle of cultivation. However, his cultivation base was already at the pinnacle of this world. What could he do to push his cultivation base and combat power to the next level? This was a problem that needed to be solved urgently. Duga Cho, on the other hand, was burdened with worries. What should he do after this? How could he hope to fulfill his long-cherished wish? At the entrance of the residence of Yin, Jilingxi was standing there, watching with her head raised. Anxiety and worry were written all over her pretty face. Beside her was Shangguan Lingxiu, who looked equally worried. Both of them wanted to go to the residence of 9 Supremes to see what was going on, but Yun Xiaoyao would not allow it. Yin Yang alone is already worrying enough. If the two of you were to go over as well, with so many experts and almost all the pinnacle experts gathered at this critical juncture, just the safety issue alone would scare the wits out of us if the two of you were to go over. No going. With Yin Yang's father, Yun Xiaoyao's strong objection, the two girls, who knew that the situation was against them, could only wait by the door obediently. Lao Mei and Feng Mafei, on the other hand, were much calmer than the rest. They even scoffed at Yun Xiaoyao and the others' anxiousness. Danger? That was impossible. That was Lord Supreme Cloud we were talking about. What danger could Supreme Cloud possibly face? This must be another fortuitous encounter. When he was still so weak, he was already invincible, and had limitless opportunities. Now that his cultivation base had risen to the pinnacle of this world, what danger could there be? However, it was a pity that we had to watch over the house. If we could join in the fun, we might even be able to get a share of the loot. After all, they had experienced this kind of opportunity many times. They weren't surprised at all. Instead, they were happy to see it happen. It was only because of old Yun's father's forceful restraint that they could not act rashly. They could not help but grumble inwardly about old Yun's overreaction. It had deprived them of a chance to improve. As for the 4 noble young masters of Dong Tianling, they were even less worried. They did not even understand what was going on, and were playing mahjong leisurely. The faces of the 4 of them were covered with paper slips. These paper slips were not IOU slips, but 10,000 taels of silver per slip. This method was both interesting and exciting. It could even be said that the 4 of them were fighting in full swing, without any distractions. To put it bluntly, they were so engrossed in the fight that they wanted to completely overwhelm the others that they did not notice the change of the purple qi. Bai Yixue and his master, Xiao Xiaoqing, had already moved into the residence of Yin, and were naturally waiting at the entrance. Bai Yixue looked indifferent, his emotions similar to Lao Mei and Feng Mafei, completely nonchalant. However, Xiao Xiaoqing was nervous, looking down to check his attire, and tidying himself up from time to time. Then, he paced around with a frown, his expression conflicted and expectant. It was obvious that he was worried about his gains and losses. Occasionally, clouds of gray fog rose into the air around the residence of Yin. It was the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld coming out to check. Seeing that there was no concrete news, they returned immediately. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, 3 tall silhouettes appeared at the end of the long street, walking side by side. Jilingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu looked from afar, and heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. The person in the middle was tall, his demeanor was elegant and composed, and he was dressed in a purple robe. Who else could it be but Yin Yang? Jilingxi snorted, forcefully suppressing the glint of joy in her eyes. She lifted her head proudly, and went back just like that. Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but take 3 to 4 steps forward to welcome him. However, when she turned to see that Jilingxi had already gone back, she hesitated for a moment before turning around and going back as well. Yin Yang was initially filled with excitement when he saw the 2 ladies who were deeply in love with him from afar. Just as he was about to go over and greet them, he realized that there was no longer anyone in front of him when he took 4 to 5 steps forward. Yin Yang. Ha 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 ha. Ling Xiaozui could not help bursting into laughter. Yin Xiaoyao, who was also standing by the door with his arms behind his back, said, "Is everything all right? You're back?" His voice was calm, as if he was unaffected. "Yes, everything is all right. I'm back." Yin Yang replied with a face full of reverence. That's good, that's good." Yin Xiaoyao smiled. He then nodded at Duge Chou and Ling Xiaozui before turning to leave without another word. Yin Yang could see that Yin Xiaoyao was completely relaxed at the moment. He walked in without turning his head back, as if he did not care whether Yin Yang returned or not. However, the trail of sweat on his back had already exposed his worry. There was only genuine shock in Yin Yang's eyes, and he remained silent for a long time. "Master!" With a cry of sorrow and joy, Xiao Xiaoqing knelt down with a plop and crawled forward frantically. He lifted his head, his face wet with tears. "Master!" Sob, sob, sob. "I finally get to see you again today." Xiao Xiaoqing knelt on the ground and hugged Duge Chou's leg, bawling his eyes out. He refused to get up no matter what. Duge Chou sucked in a deep breath and tried his best to control his emotions, scolding him angrily. Get up quickly. So many people are watching. How improper." "Master, if you don't forgive me, I won't get up." Xiao Xiaoqing bawled. Duge Chou retorted angrily. "Do you have any shame? You may be shameless, but do I? If I didn't forgive you, why would I ask you to come back? Could it be that I haven't been angry enough? Then is Master willing to accept me as a disciple again?" Xiao Xiaoqing lifted his head in anticipation. Duge Chou snorted and said, "If not, how could I allow you to call me master?" Xiao Xiaoqing was overjoyed. He sprung up and said with a grin, "I knew it. This disciple is so handsome and talented. How could master bear to chase me out?" "Ha ha." His face was still wet with tears. It was a ghastly sight to behold, but he was actually beaming with joy. Ha ha ha. Yin Yang and Ling Xiaozui could not help guffawing. Duge Chou could not help sighing. His face contorted as he said, "Xiao Xiaoqing, taking you in as a disciple might be the biggest mistake I've made in my life. I didn't expect that I, Duge Chou, would make the same mistake again and again." He sighed after that. Forget it. My face has long been disgraced by you." Xiao Xiaoqing stepped forward eagerly, grinning as he helped Duge Chou up. He chuckled and said, "Master, if you don't embarrass your disciple, who should you embarrass? Besides, don't people live their whole lives for this face? Isn't the existence of this face? Isn't it meant to be lost? Went fishing today, wasted a day. I regret it immensely. It would have been fine if I had caught it, but it's a pity that the Air Force commander is dead." Chapter 760. Yin Yang and Ling Xiaozui were dumbfounded by the words. A man had earned his reputation all his life just to prepare to be humiliated? Such an argument was bizarre. But one had to admit that there was a tiny bit of truth to it. A twisted argument was still a reasonable one. Duge Chou's face turned green in the face of such a wonderful person. He sighed at the sky, speechless. He felt that it was the biggest mistake of his life to allow this fellow back into the school. It was unforgivable. Sure enough, he had lost all his face the moment they met. "Slow down, master. Master, this disciple has specially brought your favorite Yunshan Maojian this time. This is... Master, you haven't changed at all these years. You're still as handsome and spirited as ever." Amidst Xiao Xiaoqing's incessant flattery, he helped Duge Chou to walk into the residence of Yin. Bai Yixue followed behind, covering his face with both hands. "What can I do? I'm also very helpless to have such a master." Duge Chou sighed continuously. He had not even taken 10 steps, but he had already sighed 20 times. He deeply felt that summoning this fellow back this time could very well be the biggest mistake he had ever made in his life. He was really despicable. It wasn't easy for him to expel this scoundrel from the sect and leave the peace and quiet in front of him for so many years. But in his old age, he was muddle-headed and brought him back. Looking at this despicable face made him want to violently slap it. "Xiao Shui! Xiao Shui!" Xiao Xiaoqing called out to his disciple as he served his master. Bai Ishue ran over with his head lowered, covering his face. Master, I'm here. Today is a joyous day for you and me. Both of us have been taken in by your grandmaster again. This is a joyous occasion. How can we not celebrate such a joyous occasion? Go prepare 40 to 50 dishes quickly. Make it as grand as possible. Get some fine wine as well. Tonight, I want to have a good time. Duga Cho glared at him. What do you want to have a good time for? Xiao Xiaoqing choked. Then he blinked his eyes and smiled. Disciple wants to smell the wine. Hee. Duga Cho heaved a long sigh into the sky. For a moment, a sense of hopelessness rose within him and lingered for a long time. The joy and excitement of seeing this disciple that he had not seen for many years actually lasted for less than a breath. And then it turned into the familiar helplessness of the past. What a sin! Anyone could see Duga Chao's exasperation clearly. Ha ha ha! Xiao Xiaoqing chuckled and followed behind Duga Cho like a lackey. His fists massaged his master's shoulders carefully as he turned to glare at Bai Ishue sternly, urging him to hurry up. I'll go right away. Bai Ishue ran off crestfallen. Master, this disciple has missed you so much all these years. As Xiao Xiaoqing spoke, the rims of his eyes reddened. If I don't get drunk when I see you tonight, this disciple really doesn't know how else to express my excitement right now. Sob. Duga Cho glared at him helplessly, feeling too weak to even sigh. Can't you think of anything else other than wine? You're trying so hard to rejoin the school, just to lift the ban on your drinking? Brother Dugu, this disciple of yours has a pure heart. That's great. Ling Xiaozui was holding back his laughter until his stomach hurt. If he did not take advantage of the situation to add fuel to the fire and stir up trouble, when would he do so? Who are you, young one? Is there a place for you to speak here? Xiao Xiaoqing rolled his eyes and looked at Ling Xiaozui in dissatisfaction. How dare you call my master brother? Do you know who my master is? Do you know who I am? Do you know who my disciple is? Dugu Cho slapped the back of Xiao Xiaoqing's head forcefully, causing the fellow to tumble. He said angrily, How dare you be so rude? This is your senior uncle Ling. Senior Uncle Ling. Xiao Xiaoqing was dumbfounded. Since when did I have a senior uncle? This fellow is obviously younger than me. How can he be a senior uncle? Open your dog eyes wide and look closely. This is your senior uncle Ling Xiaozui. Duga Cho introduced and suddenly flew into a rage, kicking him. Be *starred. You've been hanging out with your disciple until now, and you say you don't know who this is? Why are you acting dumb? Only then did he realize that he had been fooled by this be *starred of a disciple. Xiao Xiaoqing was pleasantly surprised as he turned to kowtow. Senior Uncle Ling, it's you who has come. This disciple has long heard of your name as the world's unrivaled expert. It's a great honor to meet you today. This string of words was said almost without any hesitation. It was said in an extremely familiar and fluent manner. Ling Xiaozui could not help being stunned for a moment before he chuckled and said, Brother Dugu, your disciple is really as you said. He's truly a marvel. Even though I know that his compliment is a compliment, I still feel honored and overwhelmed with emotion. Duga Chao's face was flushed. He was embarrassed and angry. This was too shameful. Seeing how the child was still trying to get close to Ling Xiaozui and flattering him without holding back, Duga Cho was infuriated and went to teach the boy a lesson. It's fine if you say anything else, but how dare you say that Ling Xiaozui is the world's unrivaled expert? Then what about your master? Isn't he the world's unrivaled expert? Your master is the world's unrivaled expert, who has been renowned for 500 years. You've just returned to the school, and you're already deceiving your master and ancestor. Who else should I hit if not you? Your father is going to clean the house today and discipline your mouth. Following a certain someone's words and actions, Xiao Xiaoqing was flung around the yard like a rubber ball. His face was swollen and bruised, and he was beyond recognition. When Duga Cho finally stopped, Xiao Xiaoqing sat in the yard with a bruised face and heaved a long sigh of relief. He lifted his head and sighed. It feels so good. It's been so many years since I've been beaten by my master. This long-lost feeling has returned. It's still so comfortable. He sucked in a deep breath and tried his best to hold back the smile that was bursting out of his lips. Get out of my room. Seeing that Xiao Shaoqing was about to follow him into the room, Duga Chao's roar was like a thunderclap. Xiao Shaoqing rolled and crawled out of the room in terror. It's the school's misfortune. It's the school's misfortune indeed. Duga Chao's sigh sounded like it could not be washed away by the waves of the endless ocean. Wahahaha. Ling Xiaozui clutched his stomach and laughed until he was out of breath. It had been so many years, and this was truly the happiest day of his life. Chapter 761. Then, Ling Xiaozui closed the door and turned together with Duga Chou. For pairs of eyes stared unblinkingly at Yin Yang. Their gazes were strange, like a wolf eyeing a beauty. Yin Yang was shocked. What are you all doing? What's with that look? He quickly looked at himself. Ling Xiaozui smiled and said, Young brother, you've improved a lot this time around. I see that even your temperament has changed a little. Your state of mind is more complete and flawless. It looks like you've come across something great. Congratulations. Duga Chou guffawed as well, surprise flashing through his eyes. It was obvious that both of them had been suppressing this question along the way. Others might not be able to tell. But who were Ling Xiaozui and Duga Chou? Yin Yang's cultivation base had improved like a meteoric rise. No matter how hard he tried to hide it, how could the two of them not notice it? Yin Yang smiled as well, pondering how he should speak and how he should phrase his words. Young brother, you must have something to ask since you've followed us all the way. Is it something important? Asked Ling Xiaozui. Yes, indeed, Yin Yang admitted honestly. Duga Chou smiled as well. You haven't spoken a word along the way, but your cultivation base has improved tremendously. You must have experienced some mystical encounter. But you didn't tell your confidant about it right away. It's obvious that you have something important troubling you. Or perhaps it's related to your confidant as well? Yin Yang was impressed. Senior Dugu, you have a sharp eye indeed. Is it about cultivation base? Ling Xiaozui asked with a faint smile. Yes. The last time I came, I saw that there was something wrong with the girl's cultivation base. Firstly, it was unbelievable, and secondly, it was unimaginable. Now that you've revealed it to me, Ling Xiaozui said, ask directly about the information you want to know. If even the two of us can't answer the cultivation questions of this world, I'm afraid others won't be able to either. What he said was the truth. He wasn't being arrogant at all. Yin Yang mused and sorted out his thoughts before saying, actually, this junior's suspicion, it's nothing much to be said. It's just that, it's probably the specific division of cultivation realms in this world. Yin Yang paused before continuing. For ordinary cultivators, reaching the pinnacle of the peak realm is already the pinnacle. However, this realm is only the entry level for high-level cultivators. Ascending to the pinnacle of the heaven realm, there's also the Tao realm. Initially, this junior had never touched upon, or even imagined such a profound level. Now, however, due to fate, this junior has not only climbed to the pinnacle of the ninth heaven of Tao realm, I've even surpassed the pinnacle and reached the pinnacle. However, the pinnacle of Tao realm is already the limit of Tianxian continent's cultivators. There are no higher levels even in the legends. Regarding this, I've thought about my past experiences, especially the legends. Those legendary super experts obviously had cultivation far beyond this. For example, the 17th young master of the abyss, and the others. They're definitely not people who can be summed up by the cultivation of the 9th level of the Tao realm. I've mentioned just now that my cultivation base has successfully broken through the 9th heaven of Tao realm and entered a new realm. However, this junior has no idea what kind of realm this is. Perhaps I should say, what's the path of cultivation ahead of me? Yin Yang said respectfully. Please enlighten me, seniors. Duga Chou and Ling Xiaozui could not help chuckling when they heard Yin Yang's words. Nostalgia flashed across their eyes, as if they were reminiscing about their younger days. Yin Yang's current confusion was the same one they had encountered back then. Meeting Yin Yang's gaze once more, they could not help feeling envious. Back then, the same dilemma had troubled both of them for many, many years. Yin Yang, on the other hand, had just broken through, and now, he had two people who could enlighten him waiting for him. It was as if everything had been arranged, and everything was going according to plan. They would be lying to themselves if they said they were not envious of this providence and fate. I'm really too lucky. Let me speak then. Ling Xiaozui looked at Duge Chou. Duge Chou gestured for Yin Yang to speak. Therefore Duge Chou did not hesitate to speak. Wait, there's someone else who needs to listen as well. Yin Yang stopped him quickly. He dashed out like a wisp of smoke, dragging Ji Lingxi along with him. Ji Lingxi was cultivating outside, and was caught off guard when Yin Yang grabbed her arm like a little chick. She had yet to snap out of it as she spat angrily. You! Just as she was about to teach him a lesson, she saw Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou looking at her with an odd smile. She could not help blushing, not knowing where to place her hand that had been raised. Why don't you quickly sit down and listen to the two seniors talk about cultivation levels? Haven't you always been thinking about the problem of higher cultivation levels? Yin Yang did not stand on ceremony, and pointed at the chairs to assign them. Ever since he had broken through, Yin Yang felt unprecedentedly confident. He had regained his, "your brother entrusted you to me," attitude. Hearing the tone that she had not heard for a long time, Ji Lingxi's breath was stuck in her chest, and could not be released. She sat down sulkily and rolled her eyes, but she perked up her ears obediently. Honestly, the issue of a higher level of cultivation was what troubled her the most now. Now that everyone was present, Ling Xiaozui began to speak. Cultivation begins with the dantian, controlling the qi of heaven and earth, traveling through the 9 orifices and 13 meridians of the human body, and assimilating it into the body. I believe all of you don't know about this foundation, but this is the foundation of all cultivators. I won't elaborate further. All cultivators in Tianxian continent come into contact with mystical qi the moment they enter the sect. The origin of mystical qi is something a sage once said. The door of Tao is a mystery beyond a mystery. Therefore, the qi of heaven and earth in this world is referred to as mystical qi. Ling Xiaozui's words unraveled a mystery in Yin Yang's heart. All cultivators think of themselves as superior, their abilities incomparable to those of ordinary people. With this as the starting point, cultivators label the cultivation methods and realms they cultivate as exceptionally superior. Who knows how many years ago, they called them the peak realm, the heaven realm, and the Tao realm. As the saying goes, to cross mountains after mountains, to cross a heaven, to see another heaven, to step onto the path of Tao, to see the 9 heavens. This is how it goes. Yin Yang nodded, expressing his understanding. Ling Xiaozui's words were concise, but they had explained the cultivation path of Tianxian continent's cultivators. Ji Lingxi could not help but ponder as well, recalling her own cultivation path step by step. She murmured, I see. However, the path of cultivation is long and endless. How can there only be these 3 realms? The so-called peak of this world is only the peak of Tianxian continent's cultivators, not the peak of cultivation. Chapter 762. Ling Xiaozui's expression was solemn as he said in a low voice. Perhaps it's easier for the both of you to understand, because you already possess a cultivation base that surpasses the 9th level of Tao realm. Of course, you would understand that there's a higher level. However, many cultivators in Tianxian continent were troubled by this bottleneck for countless years back then. They knew that there was a path ahead, but they had no clue where to start. Yin Yang's expression was one of understanding, but he was also a little perplexed. After a pause he asked, May I ask, Senior, what is the reason behind this? Ling Xiaozui chuckled humorlessly. The bottleneck after the 9th level of Tao realm is very different from the bottleneck of the peak realm and heaven realm. When one reaches the limit of the 9th level of Tao realm, the dantian in one's body can no longer contain mystical qi. The more one absorbs, the more one loses. Based on this premise, there's naturally no way forward. Until there was a senior who had reached the peak of his cultivation base. He tried everything he could, but he couldn't make any progress. Feeling depressed, his enemies found out about his whereabouts. They even gathered a dozen experts of the same level to ambush him. It was an unintentional battle. The senior was first poisoned, then he was ambushed and severely injured. Then he was hunted all the way. Exhausted, He couldn't continue and his life was about to come to an end. Helpless, he was forced to perform the art of soul disintegration, wanting to perish together with the enemy. However, not only was he lacking in strength, he had suffered too many injuries. His physical body was already riddled with holes, to the point that he couldn't complete the self-detonation. However, it was at such a critical juncture that he felt that the mystical chi of heaven and earth drawn into his body by the art of soul disintegration did not leak out. Instead, it charged madly and irregularly within his body. Then, he realized that 2 new chakras had been awakened from the original 9 chakras in his body. With the awakening of these 2 chakras, his ability improved tremendously, and his condition recovered. He managed to turn the tables and defeat a dozen experts of the same level, forcing them to flee. Since then, it was then spread among the higher-ups that there are more than just 9 chakras in a human body. There are hidden chakras, there are many of them. Ling Xiaozui sighed. After that, this trial was called the God's Shackles by our descendants. Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi murmured at the same time. God's Shackles. Yes, it's the Empyrean Shackles. If you don't reach this level that's close to the demigod realm, it's impossible to touch this special layer of restriction. Ling Xiaozui sighed softly. Since the beginning of time, how many tens of thousands of years have passed? Countless geniuses have stopped before this stage. On the path of cultivation, the most important thing is talent. However, this first challenge has eliminated more than 90% of the people in this world. Another 90% of the people in this world will be eliminated in the first challenge. Another 90% will be eliminated in the next challenge. Another 90% will be eliminated in the next challenge. Another 90% will be eliminated in the next challenge of the Tao realm. Another 90% will be eliminated in the Tao realm. So the probability of a Xiuzha that can advance to natural shackles is not 1 in 10,000, but not 1 in a million. Yes, it's that harsh. So far, this is Tianxian continent's overall level classification. Ling Xiaozui said, Dugu and I were exceptionally lucky. Dugu was infatuated with love when he entered the martial path and walked the path of passion. Infatuated with love, he was infatuated with martial arts. Because of this, he broke through the limit of chakras by chance. I don't know how many chakras he broke through, but it was because of this that he entered a brand new cultivation path. As for me, I entered the path of swordsmanship completely. In order to break through this challenge, Ling Xiaozui looked as if he could not bear to recall the past, as he shook his head with a bitter smile. Each time I tried to break through, I always pierced a chakra in my body with my sword. In total, I tried 15 times. Then, with the help of the gentle water and the power of the divine fish, I really broke through the barrier of God's shackles. My constant search for the divine fish was actually to consolidate my realm. Yes, the 7-scaled fairy. Ling Xiaozui looked at Yin Yang with a smile. It's also because of this that I often come to Tiantang City and get to know younger sister Yin. It was also because of this that I met you, young brother. Yin Yang nodded and smiled faintly, recalling the time when he met Ling Xiaozui while fishing. A long time had passed. He had grown from a small shrimp to where he was now. For a moment it felt like a dream. Ji Lingxi asked from the side. This is still different from my situation. When I cultivate, there won't be a situation where I can't absorb mystical qi, or have mystical qi leak out. My cultivation base and capability have been increasing steadily. I only want to know now, what's the so-called path ahead? Ling Xiaozui said. Don't be hasty, don't be hasty. We're about to get to the main topic. Regarding the next step in cultivation, I've explored many times. I've even sneaked into the bound of universe to ask around. Although the process was fraught with danger, I've gained something in the end. Sigh. I have to say that the bound of universe's information has a longer history than that of Tianxian continent. After a few twists and turns, I've managed to find some reliable information. It's only then that I've uncovered the mystery of Tianxian continent's cultivation. Ji Lingxi and Yin Yang could not help but perk up their ears. Both of them realized that what Ling Xiaozui was about to reveal might be the greatest secret in this world. It's said that Tianxian continent didn't have this name many thousands of years ago. Back then, it was actually called Xianxian continent. Xianxian continent? What kind of name is that? Yin Yang smacked his lips and chuckled. It's not as good as Tianxian continent. Ling Xiaozui said. What's the use of having a nice name? Xianxian continent produced many masters who could dominate the world back then. That was glory, that was splendor. Legend has it that there was a young man who was born as a debauchee like you. And he was different from you. He was a real debauchee in the beginning, the kind that couldn't be saved. But the moment he woke up to reality, he worked hard and improved by leaps and bounds. His cultivation rose in a straight line, like a hot knife cutting through butter. Success came naturally when the conditions were right. In the end, he even became the ruler of the Xianxian continent. And he completed all of this in less than 20 years. The speed of his improvement was not only unprecedented, but also unprecedented. 20 years. Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. To transcend the mortal realm and become the ruler of a world in less than 20 years. Is this really possible? It sounded like a myth, a fantasy, a ridiculous legend that had been passed down. Chapter 763. You didn't hear wrongly. It really is less than 20 years, but I'm not sure exactly how many years it was. After all, it's been too long, and the specific timeline has long been buried in the long river of history. Only the biographies recorded that this lord was incredibly talented back then. But his way of doing things was his own way. His way of doing things was between good and evil, neither good nor evil. Most of his actions were based on his own preferences. It was also because of his eccentric personality that he was called the evil monarch by the later generations. After a long time, no one dared to mention his real name. All the records related to him only addressed him respectfully as Lord Monarch. Ling Xiaozui's face was filled with reverence. Evil monarch, Yin Yang murmured. He felt that the name was straightforward and indescribably domineering. This Lord Evil Monarch has left too many legends in the Xianxian continent. Later on, due to his exceedingly high cultivation base, this heaven and earth started to be unable to withstand this Lord Evil Monarch's supreme might. In the end, Lord Evil Monarch left with his beautiful family, shattering the void and leaving. The entire continent can't contain one person, supreme might. Yin Yang could not help but gape, his eyes filled with fascination. It's true. According to the ancient records, the current cultivation records of the Xianxian continent are mystical practitioners from 1st to 9th mystic, followed by silver mystic, gold mystic, jade mystic, earth mystic, heaven mystic, immortal mystic, supreme, superior supreme, honor, saint, and so on. The level of cultivation at that time could be said to be extremely thorough. Compared to the peak of our cultivation at the 9th heaven of the Tao realm, it was probably above the Supreme Master at that time. It should be around that level. The profound sky continent has long since lost the inheritance of the specific cultivation methods to go further up the path of cultivation. There is no way to continue, and it has come to an abrupt end. Ling Xiaozui sighed. What do you mean by losing the legacy and stopped abruptly? Ji Lingxi widened her round eyes. The path of cultivation has existed since time immemorial. It has always been passed down to the next generation. Since it once existed, it's impossible for it to disappear, let alone for all of it to vanish. How absurd is it to say that it has come to an abrupt end? Ling Xiaozui chuckled dryly. Ridiculous? At first glance it does sound absurd, unreasonable, and even more unreasonable. However, this is the truth, the reality. Speaking of which, this matter is also related to the evil monarch. At that time, before the evil monarch broke through the void, he did something earth-shattering, saving the lives of the entire continent. It can be said that his merits are immeasurable, and he has blessed the common people. However, after the old man left this place, who knows how many years later, the foundation he left behind attracted the covetous eyes of some people. There's nothing strange about that. Everyone in the world is forgetful and greedy. If it doesn't involve their own benefits, they might remember the good things they had done in the past. But once the benefits are enough, they can do anything. The so-called friendship is just a bargaining chip for betrayal. What's more tragic is that not only did those people covet the old man's legacy, but they also tried to erase the traces of the evil monarch in this world. The person who orchestrated this matter was very resourceful, spending hundreds of years to build a sect to educate the people. He purposely magnified the word evil in Lord Evil Monarch's name, calling him an unorthodox devil. The so-called salvation was merely a coincidence, not a deliberate act. At that time, it had been far too long since Lord had left. The foundation that Lord had left behind had long been shaken by the wind and rain, and had lost its former glory. Only a few descendants were left to defend it. At that time, the people of the world had already forgotten Lord Evil Monarch's grace of saving the world, intentionally or unintentionally, and stood on the opposite side. It was also at that time that the descendant of one of the evil monarch's old friends, the continent's wealthiest man, did not hesitate to spend all his wealth to protect Lord Evil Monarch's legacy. However, he was targeted by the people, and his family was destroyed in the end. Perhaps the heavens are watching the actions of man. At the very last moment, the continent was in the palm of the person's hand, gathering all forces to encircle Lord Evil Monarch's final legacy. Lord Evil Monarch returned from his travels in the galaxy and encountered this matter. Should this return be said to be a coincidence or a misfortune, a coincidence or an inevitability? After understanding the current state of affairs, the Lord Evil Monarch sneered and said, "I could save the world back then. I can destroy it now. Since the kindness has been forgotten, let the hatred hang in your heart forever." Before his words could echo in the air, the voice was still ringing in his ears. Lord Evil Monarch had already turned his hand, annihilating all the Xian continent's living beings who had participated in the opposition. After a few breaths, all the skilled cultivators of this world had perished without exception. Yin Yang sucked in a cold breath. All the opposing forces of the continent, annihilated with a flip of the palm. According to what Ling Xiaozui had said earlier, the person with the intention had connected almost everyone in the continent, which meant that everyone in the world was against him. Did that not mean that the entire continent had been annihilated with a flip of the palm? Billions of lives were gone just like that. Just a flip of the palm. In the end, only a few small fries who were not qualified to participate in this incident were left. More than 90% of the total population of this world had been wiped out. In the end, the Lord Evil Monarch smiled and said, "You don't want any traces of me to remain in this continent. You've tried your best to wipe them out completely. I shouldn't have gone along with your wishes, but all of you have perished. Your wishes have come to nothing. However, the living beings of this continent have treated me and my descendants like this. If my traces and legacy were to remain on this continent, it would be a form of blasphemy to me instead." Therefore, the Lord Evil Monarch had actually opened up a new world out of thin air with a flip of his hand. He had moved all the traces that belonged to him into that world. Then he had named this new world, the Bound of Universe. Ling Xiaozui looked at Yin Yang and said, "This is the Bound of Universe. The origin of the Bound of Universe. Do you understand now? Why doesn't Tianxian continent have a higher level of legacy? It's because the Lord Evil Monarch hated this continent so much that with a single thought, he had wiped out the entire continent's profound legacy, leaving only the portion below honor level. Therefore, to go a step further, or even a few more steps, we must ascend to the Bound of Universe." Ling Xiaozui chuckled humorlessly. Our current cultivation base should be at the level of honor level, if we were to be in the Bound of Universe. But we still don't know which level of honor we're at. After all, we don't have any cultivation methods above that here. Even if we were to go to the Bound of Universe, we'd have to join a certain sect, or serve a certain family to be able to learn them. This is also the main reason why I've never wanted to go to the Bound of Universe. The people of the Bound of Universe don't welcome guests from Tianxian continent. To them, we're cultivators from the gods' forsaken land. Our wild ambitions are despicable." Ling Xiaozui chuckled bitterly, his expression bitter. Chapter 764. Yin Yang understood Ling Xiaozui's feelings very well. Even if one were to disregard his identity and background, He was still someone who had ruled over the Tianxian continent for a very long time after all. If he were to head to the bound of universe, if he was unwilling to be mediocre, he would need to find a force to rely on. They could either become an ordinary disciple of a sect and slowly climb up, or become a vassal of an aristocratic family. What was the difference between that and a servant? Not to mention the fact that he was someone who came from the forsaken land of the gods. It was truly unbearable. If that was the case, not only was Ling Xiaozui unwilling to go, Yun Yang was also unwilling to go. But if he didn't go, he would never be able to take another step forward. This was a dead knot with no solution. How big is the bound of universe? Yun Yang asked in a low voice. It's very, very big. It's hard to describe with words. Ling Xiaozui chuckled humorlessly. It was a coincidence that I used a treasure to sneak in. Luckily, what I wanted to know wasn't exactly a secret in the bound of universe. But that treasure of mine was destroyed when my identity was exposed, and I fell out of the spatial rift while being chased. If we want to go to the bound of universe now, it's actually very simple. All we have to do is concentrate all of our cultivation base and trigger the heaven and earth's response. Then, a spatial tear will automatically open, and we can enter the bound of universe through the spatial tear. But there's a high chance that the people of the bound of universe will discover our identity and background. Once our identities are exposed, we'll become lowly commoners. Lowly commoners from the forsaken land of the gods. Duga Cho sighed as well. That's not right. If that's the case, how did Lei Dongtian come down that day? Moreover, he boasted that his cultivation was not ordinary. Although he was not at the peak, he was still a first-rate expert. Yin Yang asked in surprise. Lei Dongtian's cultivation base was impressive at the time, but now it seems that it's nothing much. How could he come and go freely? There must be something fishy about this. What's more, sixth brother Supreme Thunder also came from the bound of universe. His cultivation was even lower, but he still came to the Tianxian continent. How could there be no reason for this? Ling Xiaozui pondered and said, there must be some special way. However, I don't believe that someone with a cultivation base lower than ours can travel freely between the bound of universe and Tianxian continent. There must be many restrictions. Oh, Yin Yang replied thoughtfully. Perhaps this could explain why Lei Dongtian did not come back after he left, right? But what could be the reason? Speaking of cultivation base, Ling Xiaozui looked at Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi and said, both of us old fellows have gone through a lot of hardships and countless life and death experiences of our forefathers before we were lucky enough to break through the shackles of God. What about you two young ones? Duga Cho was perplexed as well as he said, that's right. A situation like the both of you is unprecedented and unheard of. Previously, I was still thinking that Yin Yang might have been reborn because of the residence of 9 Supremes, but looking at it carefully, Miss G's cultivation base has obviously broken through the immortal's shackles a step earlier. The depth of her cultivation base now is probably even higher than both of us old fellows. This is really strange. As he spoke, he grabbed Yin Yang's hand to feel his pulse and probed Yin Yang's body, bit by bit with his refined mystical qi. Yin Yang was not bothered at all, and did not resist. He was puzzled by his own physical condition as well. However, Duga Cho had only probed halfway when he stopped abruptly. Lifting his head, he looked at Yin Yang like he had seen a ghost. You, how many chakras have you awakened? Or do you actually have a unique physique? Yin Yang scratched his head. This junior really doesn't know. This junior only had 7 chakras in the beginning. Then through many coincidences and this incident, I became what I am now. May I ask how many chakras have both of you awakened, seniors? As he spoke, he looked at Ling Xiaozui and Duga Cho. Duga Cho did not speak, but Ling Xiaozui said honestly, I've awakened 15 until now. Let me see. As he spoke, he began to feel Yin Yang's pulse as well. Similarly, before his mystical qi could complete a full cycle in Yin Yang's meridians, it suddenly jolted and was withdrawn. Lifting his head, he stared at Yin Yang in bewilderment, his breathing labored. You've awakened all of them? He turned to look at Duga Cho, who nodded with an aggrieved expression. The two experts were speechless for a good while. Yun Yang had only circulated his qi halfway, but he could already tell that he had awakened at least 100 chakras. What would happen if all of them were completed? How many chakras were there in a human body? Duga Chao's face was contorted as he said, I've awakened 16, and it took me more than 570 years. I haven't improved since 260 years ago. Ji Lingxi extended her hand excitedly and said, Have you seen how many chakras I've awakened? Are there any more than Yin Yang? Ling Xiaozui felt her pulse as well, and shuddered as if he had been electrocuted. His eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. You've awakened all of them as well. Even more than Yin Yang? What's going on? What? Duga Cho stood up in shock and grabbed Ji Lingxi's hand to feel as well. Then he plopped down on the chair, cold sweat dripping from his forehead. How can such a thing happen in this world? This is killing me. The two experts exchanged a look. Ji Lingxi said weakly, I don't know about Yin Yang. Anyway, it seems like I was born with a mess of chakras. I can't even count how many of them there are. I was judged to be unable to go far in the cultivation journey early on, so my family didn't like me since a long time ago. It's only recently that I felt better after a few days of good sleep. It would have been better if she had not said it. Now that she had said it, Ling Xiaozui and Duga Cho felt like they were about to break down. If that was the case, then your chakras were fully manifested when you were born, and your chakras were cleared after a few days of sleep? We've been cultivating our entire lives, but it's not even comparable to your reincarnation. If you're so arrogant, why don't you just go to heaven and show off to us country bumpkins? What's the point? Is it really that interesting? The two unparalleled experts could not understand their current state at all. There was an indescribable sense of grievance. This was the first time in their lives that they had experienced such a feeling. It was too unfair. If you guys had also gone through arduous cultivation and experienced many things to awaken so many chakras, we wouldn't have to feel so bad. However, what was the meaning of awakening the moment you were born? What was the meaning of this? Cheating, was this all there was to it? The god's shackles that had stumped everyone else didn't even exist for the two of you? Compared to the two men's speechlessness, Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi were excited, even eager to try. Chapter 765. Ling Xiaozui snorted and said angrily, It doesn't matter if we spar. I haven't exercised for a long time. Cultivation base is linked to combat power, but it's not the same. Duga Cho snorted as well and said with a tilt of his head, That's right. Even if our cultivation bases are the same, there's still a difference in the combat power we can unleash. Whether our foundation is stable or not, our state of mind is still very different. In other words, both of you may be gifted, but compared to our years of accumulation, you're still a long way off. Ji Lingxi was excited, rubbing her palms together, almost ready to yell at Yin Yang. Don't let me go first. Yin Yang stopped her hurriedly. Let me spar with the two seniors first. I'll spar with you after I'm done. We can compare our strengths this way. And it's safer too. Ji Lingxi said angrily. How can you be like this? The two seniors have promised me. What are you doing interfering? Yin Yang snorted but did not answer. Instead, he rolled his eyes at her. Ji Lingxi, who was glared at, fell silent, feeling wronged. She understood what Yin Yang meant instantly, and understood that this was indeed the only way. If the red glow on her were to burst forth during the spar, it would be a life-threatening incident. The strange red glow had only shown Yin Yang in the form of recoil so far. It did not seem to be fatal, but in reality, Yin Yang was too resilient. With the help of his countless resources and cheats, he was too resilient. There were only two of them. The other one, who had suffered the recoil from the red glow, had already reincarnated a long time ago. If the red light really came out of nowhere during the sparring session and killed Ling Xiaozui and Duga Cho right away, it would be a grave matter. With the intensity of the red glow, the probability of danger was at least 70 to 80%, even if it was not 100%. Such a huge risk could never be taken. Outside, Fang Mafei, Lao Mei, and the rest were busy arranging food and wine, while Bai Yishue had gone all over the city to purchase unique and rare ingredients. Xiao Xiaoqing paced around with his arms behind his back, sniffing occasionally and mumbling with a frown. Where is the residence of Yun's fine wine? Why can't I smell the fragrance of good wine in such a big mansion? This is different from what we agreed on. Towards this fellow, Feng Mafei and Lao Mei had gone from welcoming him respectfully and treating him as an honored guest to ignoring him and treating him with disdain. Although this fellow was advanced in age, he was still a generation older than both of them. They were of the same generation as Bai Yixue, so of course, Xiao Xiaoqing was a generation older than them. In terms of age, this fellow was even older than Ling Xiaozui. After all, he was Duge Chao's only disciple. However, Feng Mafei and Lao Mei had no intention of taking this fellow seriously, much less treating him as an elder. He was just a clown. When they first met, it was just a greeting. Senior, you don't look old at all. But it actually made this guy laugh heartily and boast about his appearance for a long time. Others would only compliment him once or twice. Was there anyone else who would brag about themselves for a long time? Not to mention, this fellow wanted to make Feng Mafei, who had praised his youthful looks, his sworn brother. Feng Mafei was on the verge of breaking down. If I were to become sworn brothers with you, Bai Yixue and I would have to break off our friendship tomorrow. And this was the lightest state. Once he recovered, he would have to use his passive sword to greet him. Even if he wanted to harm someone, this was not the way to do it. Yun Xiaoyao would also occasionally come to check on the progress. This meal was truly incredible. This was the first time King Yin found out the true identity of the two middle-aged men who had stayed in his house for a few days. Ling Xiaozui, Duge Chou. Lord Yun almost broke down when he heard these two names. They were the legends of the pugilistic world. And they were the ones that hadn't expired yet. Now they were all living in my courtyard. Therefore, King Yin had decided to accompany Yin Yang personally tonight. It would be best if these two people could give Yin Yang some pointers on his martial arts. King Yin would never have thought that Yin Yang and Ling Xiaozui were already sparring in Yin Yang's small yard with its tightly shut door. This could also be considered as guidance in another sense. Please. Facing the current Yin Yang, Ling Xiaozui dared not let his guard down. Yin Yang was of the same level as him now. Even if he analyzed it carefully, he could still be a few levels higher than Yin Yang. But Yin Yang had too many trump cards up his sleeves. Ling Xiaozui did not belittle himself at all when he said that if Yin Yang were to unleash all of his abilities in a life-and-death battle, it would be hard to predict who would emerge victorious. Perhaps Ling Xiaozui thought that if that was the case, he would most likely be the one to be defeated. Luckily, this was only a sparring session. Yes, it was only a sparring session, a pure sparring session. In spite of this, Ling Xiaozui still decided to withdraw his sword first. Holding it in his hand, he said with a smile, "This is the first time in my life that I can draw my sword before the actual battle. There's no harm in being careful. Although I don't want to admit it, I have to." Yin Yang replied, "Similarly, this is also the first time that I'm embarrassed to draw my saber before a sparring session." Ling Xiaozui was speechless. Duge Chou was speechless as well. "Sparring? Why don't you dare draw your saber? Are you trying to act cool?" "My saber?" Yin Yang chuckled humorlessly. "It's too sharp. I'm afraid it'll destroy Senior's sword with a single touch. Let's not use our own weapons then. Let's just use ordinary steel swords and sabers." Ling Xiaozui swore that this was the first time in his life that someone had looked down on him like this. In this world, who would dare say that they could break Ling Xiaozui's sword with a single strike? This was simply absurd, deranged, and the ravings of a lunatic. Now, however, Yin Yang had said it so openly. He was even a little embarrassed, as if he had taken advantage of the situation. At the same time, Ling Xiaozui dared not say, "Let's just use our own sabers and swords. There's no need to hold back." He had seen Yin Yang's saber before. It was incomparably sharp. Although his sword was also an elite among swords, it paled in comparison to Yin Yang's saber. At most he could barely parry it. If it were to clash head-on, it would be over. If it were the old Yin Yang, he could protect his treasured sword with his thick cultivation base, and pull back before the sword was damaged. However, this fellow's cultivation base had improved tremendously now. He was at a delicate juncture, where he could not control his strength at all. Perhaps his lifelong partner would be destroyed by this fellow's saber. Therefore, then let's use ordinary swords and sabers. Ling Xiaozui's words made Duge Cho raise his eyes to look at him for a long time. The meaning in his gaze was inexplicably strange, complicated and indescribable. Ling Xiaozui flushed from his stare. You Ling Xiaozui, don't have the confidence to protect your sword when you're facing a young boy like this? Chapter 766. Ling Xiaozui said fiercely. If you have the guts, use your own sword when you spar with him later. It's the easiest to wield, and you can wield it freely. Duge Cho snorted and rolled his eyes. Do you think I'm stupid? Ling Xiaozui was exasperated. If you're not stupid, why are you looking at me like that? What do you mean? Are you stupid? Ling Xiaozui's stance was natural, leisurely, elegant and magnanimous. No matter what sword it was, as long as it was in his hands, even if it was a broken piece of metal, it would be a divine sword. It would be a lethal weapon that could split mountains and oceans. On the other hand, the saber in Yun Yang's hand was not as eye-catching. It was just an ordinary saber, nothing out of the ordinary. Come on, Ling Xiaozui said casually. Let me see how much you've improved. Yun Yang did not hold back. His cultivation base had suddenly skyrocketed, and what he needed the most now was an opponent like Ling Xiaozui. To Yun Yang, this sparring match was of utmost importance. Yun Yang's saber light flickered as a wave of saber light bloomed. Majestic mystical qi gushed out like a tsunami. The ordinary saber actually glowed brilliantly. Raising the saber, Yun Yang hollered. This is called the merciless blade. A cold gleam seemed to descend from the heavens. It was only a flash of lightning, but it felt like heaven and earth had been split into two. The stance seemed to be able to split the earth beneath his feet into two. Yet the saber's force did not stop there. Merciless indeed. Ling Xiaozui's sword light flickered as he met the strike without evading. Just as they came into contact, however, he immediately felt that the attack was endless. What surprised Ling Xiaozui even more was the indescribable force contained within the strike. It was as if it had locked onto the target's spirit, qi and spirit. An unparalleled saber art. Ling Xiaozui's eyes shone. Although Ling Xiaozui was impressed by the saber truth, Destiny's starting form, he had still countered it with a single move. After 7 to 8 changes, the tip of his sword had blocked the saber's edge and pushed it forward. This was the first time since Yun Yang had comprehended the Destiny blade that his move had been countered by his opponent, to the point where he had to face a forceful counterattack. In spite of this, Ling Xiaozui could not counterattack directly against this simple slash. Instead, he had used 7 to 8 variations. It looked easy to the onlookers, but Duge Cho, who was watching from the side, was shocked. Who was Ling Xiaozui? He was a martial arts grandmaster. To put it bluntly, Ling Xiaozui would probably be able to counter any technique in this world before he could execute it halfway and counter it back at him. Within a single sword strike, it was the right thing to do to counter the enemy's moves. Now there were so many variations in his starting stance against Yun Yang. This shouldn't be the case. Yun Yang sheathed his saber. Merciless Tao. The saber light was like a swimming dragon, circling and flickering. The saber light turned into a path leading to the heavens, filled with a lonely atmosphere and an aloof coldness. Anyone who walked on this path would be mercilessly chopped down. Ling Xiaozui's feet moved, changing his position for 17 to 18 times in an instant, but he still could not shake off the saber's sharp pursuit. Surprise flashed in his eyes as he moved again, the sword light whistling as he launched another counterattack. Sword to the south. Ling Xiaozui had struck. Duge Cho's eyes narrowed. Duge Cho was well aware of Ling Xiaozui's initial plan. Rather than calling it a spar, it would be more accurate to say that Ling Xiaozui was using his profound cultivation base and years of experience to guide Yun Yang's saber art. It would be even better if he could consolidate his cultivation base through this battle. These were exactly what Yun Yang needed the most, since he had just improved too quickly. It was like a divine sword that had taken shape and needed to be hammered to remove impurities, so that it could be forged into an unparalleled blade. Ling Xiaozui should be playing the role of the sledgehammer. Since it was to be guided, It did not matter if he drew his sword or not. He only needed to deal with it with a tight defense and comment after that. However, even Duga Cho did not expect that Ling Xiaozui would be forced to draw his sword in the second move. It was obvious that it was impossible to nullify this peerless saber strike that was laced with the cold charm of Tao if he were to simply deal with it. With a clang, the saber and the sword clashed. With a flip of his body, Yin Yang swung his saber outwards. A glint of saber light scattered outwards, scattering into a sky full of fireflies before falling down like a sky full of meteors. It was as if it had formed a world of its own. Saber lakes. Ling Xiaozui did not budge as he hollered. Drunken sword piercing the stars. The long sword emitted specks of sword radiance. His wrist shook rapidly, and tens of millions of sword radiance counterattacked, successfully canceling out the countless saber radiance derived from the saber mundane world. However, his face had become completely solemn. He could only defend against this attack with his profound cultivation base and rich experience. If it had been someone slightly weaker than him, the only option left would probably be to retreat quickly. Furthermore, he might not even be able to retreat in time. Life and death in a thought. Yin Yang's voice reminded him. Then, another ferocious slash was unleashed. The saber light filled the sky, like the Milky Way hanging upside down, its power even stronger than saber lakes. Indeed, Ling Xiaozui sucked in a deep breath. The main intention of the previous attack was to force the opponent to retreat. If the opponent had chosen to retreat, he would have to pay a considerable price when faced with this attack that followed up with victory. At the very least, he would be flustered and flustered. This is a strike that follows up with victory. It's best to use it when one has the upper hand. Even if it can't kill the enemy immediately, it can immediately turn the situation into a victory. Ling Xiaozui exclaimed. With his experience and vision, he could naturally see the ingenuity of this attack. Furthermore, Yun Yang had yet to unleash his full potential due to certain factors. If he were to unleash his full potential, upended river of blood. Yin Yang's elegant voice rang out again. Accompanying his voice was a towering saber light that swept across the sky. Ling Xiaozui could only feel a river of flowing blood appearing before his eyes, falling from the sky in an unstoppable manner. Great saber! Ling Xiaozui could not help but exclaim in awe as he faced the incoming attack. There was no other reason than the fact that this attack was too brutal and domineering. Even with Ling Xiaozui's state of mind, he could not help but shudder in fear. Even though Yun Yang could not unleash the full potential of this skill, the horrifying sight of the river of blood falling from the sky, connecting heaven and earth, and the pool of blood in the mortal realm, was enough to shake anyone's state of mind. Ling Xiaozui changed his state of mind instantly, reciting the art of ice to calm himself down. He closed his eyes, ignoring the strange phenomenon of the pool of blood before him. The sword in his hand hummed as it drew an impenetrable wall, made entirely of refined sword light, using all its power for defense. He even took 2 steps back to reserve some buffer space, preparing for a counterattack once the attack was slightly delayed. Honestly, Ling Xiaozui's response was ingenious. Even if it were Duga Cho or Jun Moyan, they would not have a better situation. It was a pity that Yin Yang did not wait for the upended river of blood to finish. He retracted the saber in his hand at the right time, and another strange arc was formed. Chapter 767. Reincarnation under the saber. The meaning of this move was simple. No matter who you were or how strong and expert you were, reincarnate under this saber. Ling Xiaozui was shocked once again. Logically speaking, even if it was a peak expert in the world, when faced with the unparalleled viciousness of the inverted blood river, the blood world's progenitor, 80 to 90% of the time, the priority would be to defend, and at most leave a bit of strength to defend and counterattack. Ling Xiaozui, however, had an experienced eye. He had seen through the move before it could be countered. Not only had he hidden an attack within a defense, he had also laid down a space for counterattack. Once the opponent's attack was over, he would use the buffer space he had left to launch a counterattack. It was a marvelous counterattack. Despite such a marvelous counterattack, it was still within the prediction of the creator of Saber Truth, Destiny Blade. Before the inverted river of blood reached its end, a peculiar whirlpool had manifested and formed an eerie aura field that separated both of them, causing Ling Xiaozui's subsequent plan to fall through. If he had continued with his original plan and launched a pursuit now, he would have fallen into this peculiar aura field and be restrained. The loss outweighed the gain. It was also at the moment the aura field was formed that Yun Yang's saber made a comeback, reversing the aura field and forming a new wave of counterattack. It was a marvelous saber technique that predicted the enemy's every move. It was marvelous. Even with Ling Xiaozui's many years of battle experience, he could quickly tell that no one could escape the range of the saber, no matter who it was that faced this move. Only by resisting it with one's true cultivation base could one hope to escape. However, resisting it was equivalent to facing a strange, contradictory aura field at the same time. How could one know the direction of the attacker's saber, and where the tip of the saber that controlled the aura would land? In fact, this was the greatest danger of this move. Ling Xiaozui howled, his body spinning rapidly. Not being able to break the technique did not mean that he had to take it on passively. Using his spinning speed and dense sword energy, Ling Xiaozui constructed sword mountains that protected him from the wind and rain. This was the best way to neutralize the opponent's attack with the purest and tightest defense. And it could even be said to be the best way to break the current attack. However, there was a precondition, and that was that the opponent had to have a much higher cultivation than the attacker. Such a passive and extreme defense would definitely consume far more of his cultivation than his opponent. If their cultivations were the same, it would be impossible for him to completely withstand this move. To put it more clearly, the defender relied on his great strength to deal with things. He was strong enough to defeat 10 people. Duga Cho, who was watching from the side, had his eyes widened. Ling Xiaozui had suppressed his ability to a level similar to Yun Yang's. Yet he was already at a disadvantage within a few moves. It had only been 4 moves and Ling Xiaozui was already forced to elevate his realm to deal with it. I can't believe there's such a mystical saber skill in this world. Duga Cho watched from the side. As the saying went, the onlooker had a clearer view of the situation. Putting himself in Ling Xiaozui's shoes, he wondered if there was any other way to deal with this move other than using Ling Xiaozui's method. As his thoughts raced, he had to admit that there was no other way to deal with it. Any other way would only put him in a more disadvantageous position and hasten his own defeat. Besides, after witnessing it with his own eyes, if he were to go up and face the same move again, he would have no other way to deal with it. This saber skill is truly marvelous. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that there's more than one such marvelous technique. Duga Cho sighed as he watched and studied. Each of Yin Yang's saber skills was marvelous, filled with contradictions and impossibilities. But it was also because of this that they were the most perfect embodiment. After all, was it not perfection to have contradictions and impossibilities? Duga Cho stared unblinkingly at Yin Yang's way of wielding his saber. To his surprise, he realized that each form and style of Destiny Blade contained more than 10, 20 or even more methods of channeling energy and qi. All of the methods of circulating qi and circulating breath were operating in a way that defied common sense. Yet they also carried a certain set of rules. If one or a few of them were to be forcefully operated, the practitioner's meridians would only explode, and he would die without a doubt. However, with the dozens of qi channeling methods before him, it formed an unusually unique cycle. Not only was it harmless, it was beneficial instead. It was such a qi channeling method that increased the power of the technique by several folds. The person who created this saber skill is definitely not human. Duga Cho was filled with reverence. It's God. If it wasn't for God's wisdom and understanding, how could he have created a flawless saber technique that should not belong to the mortal world? With a soft clang, Ling Xiaozui's sword and Yun Yang's saber finally clashed. When the offensive move could not be retracted and the defensive move was flawless, the final result would be a clash of weapons, a decisive battle of strength. Ling Xiaozui did not exert his strength forcefully as the saber and sword clashed. He took 3 steps back, the sword in his hand swaying to protect his entire body. He was still defending while attacking, his defense impenetrable. His aura did not diminish, but grew instead as he was ready to strike. Unexpectedly, Yun Yang's body had floated 100 feet into the air, borrowing the force of the recoil. Then the tip of the saber pointed downwards and the blade swung horizontally, falling from the sky. There was not the slightest hint of smoke or fire, like the wind from the 9 heavens, blowing into the mortal world soundlessly. If one did not feel it carefully, one would not even be able to feel the breeze. Perhaps, it should be said that when one could not feel it, this gentle breeze had already blown through the mountains and rivers, blowing through the mortal world. It was silent and gentle. The breeze was gentle, but it was everywhere, not a village. That's right, this is wind beyond the sky. Yun Yang's clear voice rang out amidst the saber light. Ling Xiaozui's expression was unprecedentedly cautious. As he drew his sword, the materialized sword light at the tip of the sword grew another 3 feet. It was as if he was facing a formidable enemy. He was giving it his all, displaying his lifetime's worth. Ling Xiaozui understood very well that although the gentle breeze that caressed one's face looked gentle and harmless, it could actually turn into lightning and thunder at any time, turning into a violent storm. However, there was still the same problem. One would never know when the wind would change. It could be at the next moment, or at any time. This was the most fatal and unsolvable problem. Chapter 768. Since he could not grasp when the enemy would change his attack accordingly, he would choose to deal with the situation by remaining unchanged and protect himself as best as he could before thinking of a follow-up counterattack. Deal with the situation by remaining unchanged, or rather, deal with the situation with one change. The breeze turned into a cold whirlwind, the chilliness pulsing erratically. Ling Xiaozui could only feel chills all over him. The saber seemed to be able to slice through any part of his body. However, there was no turning back now. Yun Yang had vanished along with the breeze, leaving no trace behind. Even the source of the attack was gone. He could not even take the risk and counterattack the source of the attack. Such a change was not due to Yun Yang activating his cloud manifestation, but it was a natural phenomenon formed by the saber-tooth, stratospheric breeze. With Ling Xiaozui's level of attainment, he could still discern this clearly. Understanding it was one thing, but how to deal with it was another matter. It was the same logic as knowing the cause and effect, but not being able to deal with it. At this moment, Ling Xiaozui even had a thought. How nice would it be to let Duga Cho guide him? Why should I stand up for him? He seemed to be regretting it a little. It was a pity that people would only feel regret after facing it. It was too late, it was futile. There was nothing they could do but sigh helplessly. Ling Xiaozui, who had fallen into an extremely disadvantageous situation, steadied himself and continued to construct the sword mountain to protect himself. He even changed the attribute of his sword energy from ferocious to gentle, leaving as soon as it touched the opponent. No matter which direction or position the opponent came from, he would always have a sword to counter it. Although there was no hope of counterattacking, there was no doubt that he would not lose. Although he would not win, he would not lose either. Ding ding, ding, ding. Dozens or even hundreds of clashes of saber and sword could be heard, but there was only the soft sound of silver needles falling to the ground. Ling Xiaozui heaved a sigh of relief, breaking out in cold sweat. It was fortunate that Yun Yang had not perfected the technique yet, or perhaps his cultivation base was still insufficient to unleash the true essence of the technique. Thus, Ling Xiaozui's line of defense remained intact. Otherwise, this technique alone would have been enough to bury his grievances on the spot and tarnish his reputation. The exquisiteness of this move had already reached the acme of perfection. It was completely unfathomable. If one had to evaluate this move, there was only one word that could describe it. It didn't belong to the human world. The next moment, an abnormally fierce murderous aura suddenly rushed over. It was an extremely violent and tyrannical aura, as if it wanted to slaughter the entire world. This move is called Mountain of Bones. Yun Yang spun in the air, his saber light dancing in the air, flinging out hundreds of saber rays that were hundreds of feet long. When he turned around again, the saber in his hand drew a strange internal arc, aiming straight for Ling Xiaozui. It was the most direct and extreme way to cleave the man down. At the same time, the hundreds of beams of saber energy that had been dispersed earlier seemed to have been summoned back to Yin Yang's saber, as if they had been summoned. They gathered and flowed towards Yin Yang's saber. Whether it was Ling Xiaozui who was in the field or Duge Chou who was outside, their expressions changed drastically. Obviously, this slash had exceeded their understanding of the technique. If the saber technique was broken down, it would be easy to explain. Yin Yang's initial move, the hundreds of saber rays, were an indiscriminate attack that aimed to lock down the target's position and pave the way for the tyrant slash that followed. Other than increasing his attack power to its peak, the tyrant slash that followed could also ensure that the target could not avoid the move and could only face it head-on, due to the effect of the dispersed saber light. There was also the convergence of the saber light. It seemed bizarre, but it was still a variation of a high-level cultivator's skill. These were not surprising if they were taken out individually. At most, they were exceptionally exquisite. However, the current situation was indeed a comprehensive deduction of the above. The scattered saber energy that Yin Yang had finally retrieved was not damaged at all, and was even slightly strengthened. The converging attack was almost equivalent to merging the hundreds of saber energy earlier into the final slash. It was appalling and unimaginable. No matter how marvelous a technique was, it still had to follow the most basic laws of physics. The saber energy that was released from afar was already released, but how could it be controlled and retrieved after the change of the technique? Both of them thought of the internal arc that Yin Yang had drawn the moment he changed his technique. Could it be that he had retrieved all the hundreds of saber rays that had been released? However, the internal arc should not have been able to repel the external world. How could it have such a whirlpool-like effect? Furthermore, how could it be possible to retrieve the saber energy without any damage? Both of them pondered. To achieve this, one must have gone through countless cycles of circulation that defied common sense in one's body. The thought seemed to be clear in their minds, but the deeper meaning behind it only made them shudder even more. This was completely contrary to the normal concept of cultivation. It was something that shouldn't have happened at all, okay? However, it had happened in Yin Yang's hands just like that. How could reality be so terrifying? Compared to Duge Chou, who was not involved and had the leisure to ponder slowly, Ling Xiaozui, who was on the battlefield, did not even have the chance to consider the details. What he could do now was to rely on his rich experience and personal understanding of cultivation to deal with the attack. He turned into a sword light and charged forward, retaliating fiercely. Facing such a saber strike, the only way to survive was to fight to the death. Ling Xiaozui truly felt that what lay before him was a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was a mountain of bones. The technique lived up to its reputation. Just the intense murderous intent and malice was enough to strike fear into any expert's heart and cause them to cower before the battle had even begun. Ling Xiaozui's back was drenched in cold sweat. With a loud boom, the saber and sword clashed once more. At the moment of contact, Ling Xiaozui retreated swiftly, as if he was no match for the opponent. His retreating silhouette spun 20 to 30 times in the yard, leaving densely packed deep saber marks wherever he passed. In spite of this, Ling Xiaozui had managed to evade the attack. The killing intent of the attack had been formed, and it was locked on by the previous form. There was no way to evade it, so he had to take it head-on. However, if he did so, he would have to face hundreds of saber light converging into a lethal strike. Not only would it be difficult for him to gain the upper hand, there was also the risk of losing and being utterly defeated. Chapter 769. Duge Chou, who was watching the battle from the side, praised inwardly. Ling Xiaozui's way of dealing with the situation was exquisite. Duge Chou asked himself if he were in Ling Xiaozui's shoes, he would not have been able to react better than Ling Xiaozui, even though he might not have been at a disadvantage. The momentary difference in blocking the attack was so precise that it was breathtaking and terrifying. That was close. Ling Xiaozui, who had successfully passed the test, was sweating inwardly. This child had actually forced me to use 80% of my ability to pass. It would be embarrassing if this went on. He might even be forced to use his lifetime's worth of cultivation base by this child. Moreover, Duga Cho was watching from the side. He had been utterly humiliated today. Just as the thought popped into his mind, he felt a chill run down his spine as he turned around. It was the first time he had ever felt such a sense of danger. Even when he and Duga Cho were ambushed by explosives at the Four Seasons Tower's headquarters, and were surrounded, he had never felt such a sense of urgency. Ling Xiaozui dared not let his guard down. Gathering a mouthful of energy, he spun around quickly, only to see a door appear before him. It was a pitch-black door, with ghastly fog billowing out from within, surging outwards like a gust of wind. The door before him was so real that it made one feel as if they were to step into it. They would no longer be able to return to the mortal realm. This is the door of life and death. The saber light dashed out from the door of life and death, like a ghostly dragon before vanishing into thin air, filling the air with murderous intent that was everywhere. It filled the entire space. Just a touch of it would mean that one had walked into the door of life and death. Ling Xiaozui was drenched in cold sweat in the face of such a lethal attack. Without hesitation, he raised his cultivation base to 90% of its level and swore inwardly. Spar? I'm not going to spar with this monster anymore. Give me pointers. Whoever is willing to do so can do it. I've decided that this good job will be Duga Cho's alone from now on. Finally withstanding the attack, Ling Xiaozui felt dizzy as if his body had been hollowed out. Of course, it was not to the extent of danger. If he had reached a point where he could no longer continue, he would have stopped. Therefore, no matter how embarrassing he was, he wouldn't be injured just like that. After all, he still had his cultivation suppressing him. If he really couldn't do anything, he would be able to withstand it with all his might. But the mental pressure was too great. Barely holding on was not a good thing for one's mental state. Although one's mental state needed to be tempered, blindly tempering it would only have the opposite effect. The last move. Yin Yang's voice rang out. Yin Yang was having a hard time as well. Each form of saber truth, Destiny Blade consumed a lot of energy. If it were not for Emmy's support, he might not have been able to complete the 4 forms and 8 styles in one go. Ling Xiaozui sucked in a long, deep breath and sprung up into the air. Although he did not have a solid foothold in the air, there was still more space for him to maneuver in midair. Faced with Yin Yang's marvelous techniques, it was never wrong to be more cautious and strategized. 18 levels of hell. As expected, Ling Xiaozui heard the name. Then, he suddenly realized that the seemingly real gate of life and death had disappeared. In its place, 6 palaces had appeared out of thin air. 6 towering, majestic, and imposing halls. Each of the palaces' doors were wide open, the thousands of ghosts within howling as they tried to rush out. Looking from afar, the 6 palaces were filled with countless strange torture tools. Mountains of knives, oil of pots, cannons, burning with 1,000 cuts. Everything was there. If it had been an ordinary person, they would have been scared out of their wits with just a glance. Ling Xiaozui could clearly feel that the power of the current move was probably the sum of the previous moves, perhaps even more. With such a judgment, Ling Xiaozui hesitated no more. With a loud roar, he pushed his cultivation power that had been boosted to 120%, going all out and fighting with all his might. Embarrassing? He could not care less about embarrassing himself. If he did not go all out, he would be even more embarrassed. Witnessing such an intense battle, Duga Cho stood up immediately, deep shock written all over his face. Another spectator, Ji Lingxi, watched Yin Yang's battle in the air with her mouth agape. She had been in this state for quite some time, her heart filled with sincere shame. Such a saber skill. How could I withstand it? To think that I had the upper hand every day when I sparred with him. But it was all because he let me win. I would have died 800 times if I were to face such a saber skill. She had overestimated Yin Yang. Her cultivation base was a dozen levels higher than Yin Yang's previously. Even if Yin Yang had an amazing saber skill to counter it, it would still be difficult for him to fight against Ji Lingxi's overwhelming force. Of course, even if Yin Yang had the ability to execute such a lethal move, how could he use it on Ji Lingxi? What if I cut that pretty little face? What would I do? Plop. Ling Xiaozui and Yun Yang landed on the ground at the same time. Yun Yang panted heavily, looking like he had just been scooped out of the water. To Yun Yang, these 5 styles and 10 styles were the first time he had unleashed them with all his might against an opponent of the same realm. He did not have to worry about hurting his opponent at all. He only had to focus on his attacks. He did not even have to worry about the opponent's sudden counterattack. He was like a hidden reef amidst the raging waves in the ocean. No matter how crazed the opponent was, he would not budge. The feeling of extreme output was exhilarating. I can't take it anymore. I'm exhausted. Yun Yang panted, sweat forming a line from his head and face, dripping down, but his face was filled with delight. But it's so satisfying. I've had my fill. Just as he finished speaking, the saber in his hand slipped out of his hand and fell to the ground with a thud. Then, he lost his balance and sat down shakily. If he threw away his wet clothes, it would be like throwing an egg against a stone again. Haha. A certain someone was completely exhausted now, otherwise, he would not have lost his composure like this. Opposite him, Ling Xiaozui was drenched in sweat as well, but his condition was far better than Yun Yang's. His eyes were glued to Yun Yang like he was looking at a monster, unable to look away for a long time. Strictly speaking, it was Ling Xiaozui who had lost by half a move. His green robe, which had almost become his trademark, was left with 6 slashes from the blade. The glints revealed his inner shirt. Even with Ling Xiaozui's pinnacle ability, he had not been able to completely evade the last move. All 6 slashes had landed on the target. If he had not dodged in time, it would not have been just his clothes that had been sliced open. Dugacho stepped forward hurriedly, his eyes wide as he stared at the slashes on Ling Xiaozui's clothes. He did not speak for a moment, the shock in his eyes unconcealable. What a powerful saber skill. I've only realized the vastness of the universe today. To be able to meet such a saber style today, it's a blessing of 3 lifetimes. Ling Xiaozui finally caught his breath and chuckled humorlessly. Shaking his head, beads of sweat rolled down from his forehead. Dugacho nodded in agreement. Brother Ling, you're at least 4 levels higher than Yun Yang. The outcome of this battle is clear. Dugacho had a clear view of the situation as a bystander. Naturally, he had an assessment of Yun Yang's actual ability. I can feel it. Ling Xiaozui nodded with a bitter smile. It's fortunate that it's so much higher. Otherwise, what you're seeing now would be a corpse named Ling Xiaozui. Dugacho chuckled humorlessly as well. Both of them turned to look at Yun Yang at the same time. Their gazes were identical. They had seen a ghost. Chapter 770. Yun Yang tried his best to stand up, but his limbs were weak, and he could not stand up. Sitting on the ground, he forced a smile and said, That felt good, that felt good. Senior Ling, we must spar more in the future. This is the first time in my life that I've had such a good spar. If we spar a few more times in the future, my saber skill will definitely improve further. Ling Xiaozui coughed, his expression darkening as he murmured, Brother Dugu will be with you when we spar in the future. It's already the fortune of 3 lifetimes for me to encounter such a peerless saber skill. How dare I be greedy? It's important to know when to be content. Dugacho said angrily, Brother Ling, you're being mean. Ling Xiaozui rolled his eyes and walked away swaying. I'm not going to keep you company anyway. Outside the courtyard, the battle had long alarmed everyone. Now Fang Mafei Xiao Xiaoqing, by Yishue Lao Mei, the 4 noble young masters, Shengguan Lingxiu, Yun Xiaoyao, and the rest were all standing quietly in the yard, watching with their mouths agape. In the air, the 10 Yama kings stared down with their mouths agape, their eyes filled with disbelief. This is Yun Yang? Of course. This, the one fighting him is Ling Xiaozui, the unrivaled expert Ling Xiaozui, acknowledged by the world? Of course. That. First Court King Qingguang was the most shocked. He recalled the first time he met Yun Yang. He shook his head, feeling as if he was dreaming, as if he was dizzy. You pinch me. Ah. There was a scream. On the street far away, His Majesty's carriage was heading towards the residence of Yin. Looking at the gray fog above the residence of Yin, he murmured, Why is it so eerie? Just as they were speaking, they heard a tragic cry. Ah! His Majesty shuddered. Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian, two veterans who had been through hundreds of battles, shuddered as well, their faces pale. There's a ghost! His words were a little inappropriate. The source of the cry was obviously the Yama king, who was many levels higher than a ghost. Duge Chou had said that he would not entertain Yun Yang, but deep down, he was eager to fight Yun Yang. Duge Chou knew very well that Yun Yang's actual cultivation base was much weaker than theirs. It was because of this that they had the leeway to deal with him. If both their cultivation bases were on par, they would have died a long time ago when faced with such a flawless technique. However, in a battle between experts of the same level, there was no mercy. Fighting with all one's might had always been the best way to elevate one's ability quickly. Although Ling Xiaozui's battle today had humiliated him, it had benefited his martial cultivation greatly. However, such an opportunity to improve oneself was rare. Furthermore, Yun Yang possessed such a marvelous saber skill, and such a strong oppressive force. If he were to fight with Yun Yang while suppressing his strength to be at the same level as Yun Yang, the benefits would be immense. In short, if he could completely withstand such a marvelous skill with the same level of ability, it would prove that he had a deeper understanding of the path of martial arts. Although this idea might not be realistic, both Duge Chou and Ling Xiaozui had high praise for Yin Yang's destiny blade. No matter how much effort he put into it, it would be difficult for him to create a technique that could rival Yun Yang's. However, as long as he experienced the oppressive force of such a marvelous skill, it was undeniable that there would be a huge improvement. Duge Chou estimated that Ling Xiaozui had already gained a new foundation from the incident at the residence of 9 Supremes. In addition to the battle today, as long as Ling Xiaozui managed to reclaim his gains, his ability would definitely rise to a new level. Perhaps he would even surpass Duge Chou. With Duge Chou's breadth of mind and realm, he would not hold a grudge or be displeased by this, but it was inevitable that he would be unhappy. After all, he was the long-established, unrivaled expert in the world. Ultimately, he had been completely overpowered by Ling Xiaozui, the unrivaled expert of the new generation. Since Yun Yang had expressed his intention to fight again, Duge Chou would not let Ling Xiaozui have the upper hand. It was best for them to advance together. However, even if they were to fight again, it would not be today. Yun Yang had exhausted himself to his limits in this battle. His body was severely depleted. Even with Emmy's help, he would not be able to recover in a short period of time. Saber Truth, Destiny Blade was marvelous. Every move and style was flawless. But it was because of this that the execution of each move was accompanied by a huge consumption of mystical qi. The last move, 18 levels of hell, in particular, had drained all of Yin Yang's mystical qi. Even the strength of his bone marrow had been sucked out by that move. The battle had ended. Yin Yang, who had breathed a sigh of relief, immediately fell into an extremely lethargic state. For the next hour, not to mention fighting, even his bones seemed to have softened. There's plenty of time for that. Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou were experts in cultivation. Naturally, they knew about Yin Yang's current state, so they would not force him. They were not in a hurry either. After all, both of them were going to stay in the residence of Yin for quite some time. There would be plenty of opportunities for them to spar. Yin Yang slumped on the chair, completely devoid of energy, but he was inwardly elated. The benefits he had gained from this exchange of pointers were enormous to the extreme. Ling Xiaozui was like a reef in the ocean, a mountain in the storm. He had blocked all the attacks. He was like a giant hammer that struck like lightning. It had allowed Yin Yang's understanding of the techniques to improve further. If Yin Yang was not exhausted, if he could continue the spar and give Yin Yang the chance to perform these techniques over and over again, he would have gained even more. However, Yin Yang was not in a hurry. He sat on the chair, looking at Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou, chuckling. With these two people here, how could he not have a chance? After that, the banquet that had been arranged earlier arrived as scheduled. There were also 3 uninvited guests participating in the banquet: His Majesty the Emperor and 2 military bigwigs who had suddenly arrived. The 3 of them sat down without hesitation. This was the residence of King Yin, which meant that it was his own home. There was no room for outsiders. Besides, people like Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou needed to be well acquainted, even if they were the rulers of a nation. Seeing that his elder brother, the emperor, had arrived unexpectedly, Yun Xiaoyao had upgraded the banquet to the level of a state banquet, inviting His Majesty to a seat of honor. He had to show some respect. Young Master Yin, this wine. Xiao Xiaoqing was very eager. I heard that you have the wine of the god of wine, Feng Xiang'a. Duge Chou was filled with frustration when he heard Feng Xiang'a's name. With a kick, Xiao Xiaoqing was sent flying. Feng Xiang'a is a fake, but the wine of the god of wine is real. Ling Xiaozui spoke fairly. Now that I think about it, either the god of wine Feng Xiang'a has always been one of Mr. Nian's avatars, or Feng Xiang'a himself has long died in Mr. Nian's hands. It's either one or the other. I can't come up with either answer. Chapter 771. Therefore, the wine in Yin Yang's hands is truly the god of wine's last masterpiece in this world, Yin Yang said with a laugh. Yin Yang laughed and said, Brother Ling is right. In this world, there aren't many people who deserve to drink such wine other than us. Let's just take it as a gift from Mr. Nian. Let's drink all of it. Let's get drunk to our heart's content, and we won't go home until we're drunk. As he spoke, he tossed out 10 pots of wine without holding anything back. Ha 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 ha, great. Xiao Xiaoqing guffawed, his eyes glowing. Young Master Yin is a bright man indeed. Then he did something that surprised everyone present. With a click of his finger, he sealed his mystical qi cultivation base completely. Everyone's thoughts raced, but they had no idea what this fellow was up to. What was he up to again? To drink, one must seal their mystical qi. The channeling of mystical qi by skilled cultivators has long become an instinct. Even if they don't do it intentionally, it will greatly resist the dizziness of being drunk and stay sober. However, this instinct is annoying to the drinker. Too annoying. Drink. Why drink? What is the purpose of drinking? Xiao Xiaoqing was exuberant. Drinking is to get drunk, to experience the dizziness after drinking. Yes, the ethereal feeling like taking a stroll in the clouds. The contentment, the comfort, the elegance, the artistic conception. Tsk tisk? Xiao Xiaoqing closed his eyes and shook his head, as if reminiscing a long-lost sentiment. Therefore, it is certain that one cannot use mystical qi when drinking. Xiao Xiaoqing enthusiastically promoted his fallacious theory to the rest, but the crowd only rolled their eyes at him. No one responded to his one-sided argument. Even his heir Bai Yishue ignored it. As the host, Yin Yang rolled his eyes, speechless for a long time at this fellow's bizarre theory. Everyone present was a person of high status and authority, even when they knew that there was no danger. Who would dare seal their mystical qi to drink? Not to mention anything else. If everyone at this table were to seal their xian qi while drinking, if an enemy were to suddenly appear at this time, wouldn't they be wiped out effortlessly by the enemy? If that were to happen, it would be laughable enough to explain the absurdity of it all. Bastard! Duge Chou gritted his teeth in anger. He finally understood why this guy had made such a low-level mistake back then. He didn't know how long he had lost his things, but he didn't know. So this was the truth. It turned out that when this fellow drank wine, he would first seal his xian qi. You've roamed outside for so long, yet you're still alive. You must be blessed with great fortune. Duge Chou's face was as dark as the bottom of a wok. Master, you flatter me too much. Although this is the truth. Xiao Xiaoqing's face drooled. This disciple's fortune and luck are all because of you, master. Scram. Before he could finish, he was kicked away by Duge Chou again. Don't learn from your master. Sigh, Duge Chou said. Bai Yishue, who had been keeping quiet out of fear, tried his best to shrink himself and reduce his presence, but he had not expected to be dragged out. He said with a pained expression, This disciple obeys and will do his best. Bauer, who had not been seen for a long time, was crawling on His Majesty's knee, his face filled with reluctance. I'm already so big. Why are you still treating me like a child of 2 or 3 years old? Shouldn't an adult's knee be a place for a child to crawl on? However, once the emperor saw Bauer, he could not move and wanted to carry him on his knee. It was something that no one could stop. Everyone sat at the same table. His Majesty looked at this and that, overwhelmed with joy. This was probably the Emperor of Yutong's long-awaited feeling of familial bliss. It was an inexplicable feeling that he had somehow obtained it. In fact, it was normal for the Emperor of Yutong to have such thoughts. The people before him were people he liked, and the wine was rare. The surrounding atmosphere was comfortable, relaxed, and unrestrained. There was no formality of a ruler or official, only brotherly love and the joy of familial bliss. Amidst such an atmosphere, His Majesty's only thought was that this was perhaps the happiest meal he had ever had in his life. Even Baoer's soft body in his arms squirmed restlessly. His Majesty felt as if he was hugging the entire world in his arms. Throughout the night, the Emperor could not stop his laughter as he drank more and more. However, no one stopped him. Even Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian did not try to stop him. To them, it had been too long since His Majesty could relax like this. To be able to get drunk so happily was a rare and precious enjoyment. How could they bear to interrupt him? All these years, the Empire of Yutong had been in a precarious situation. His Majesty and the few old men had been shouldering so much pressure. It was because they felt the same, that they could empathize and share the same thoughts. Now the pressure had finally come to an end. It had not been easy to get through these few years. If it had been a few people with weaker mental fortitude, they would have broken down long ago and committed suicide many times over. Baoer, my good grandson, come. Grandpa Emperor wants to test you today. The Emperor stroked his beard, his gaze affectionate as he smiled benevolently. The dignity of an empire's monarch was nowhere to be seen. He no longer had the title of emperor. All that was left was the identity of a grandfather. Everyone smiled as they watched the good show between the grandfather and the grandson. What does Grandpa Emperor want to test Baoer on? Baoer tilted his head. Yes, Grandpa Emperor wants to test you. What have you learned during this period of time? Yes, let me think. The Emperor tapped his forehead, thinking about what question to ask. It could not be too difficult, but it could not be easy either. This was a problem. He did not know Baoer's current learning progress. After thinking for a long time, he still could not come up with a good idea. He asked gently, Baoer, what have you been learning these days? Baoer said, nothing much. A few days ago, Uncle asked me to think about a question. I've been thinking about this question for the past few days. That's all. His Majesty was obviously very interested in this topic. He said with a grin, what question did he ask you to think about? Tell Grandpa Emperor. Baoer said innocently, that day, Uncle told me the story of when the birds are gone, the good Bao is hidden, and the relationship between this saying and reality. The crowd had been watching His Majesty play with his grandson with a grin on their faces, trying their best to be cooperative and interested. However, when the words were spoken, especially when paired with Baoer's childish voice, everyone felt as if there was a sudden rumble of thunder above their heads, as if a lightning tribulation was about to befall them. For a moment, everyone's expressions were twisted. If it were not for their composure that had been trained for so many years, they would have made a fool of themselves in public. Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian especially stared blankly. Chapter 772. Keep the bow when the birds are done. How could this phrase be brought up for discussion? Isn't this a little too much of a taboo? Whether it was a king or an official, they were extremely sensitive to these words. His Majesty's hand that was stroking his beard paused as well, his entire being frozen. His eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets as his hand trembled, and with a low grunt, a dozen strands of his beard were pulled out by himself. Oh ho ho ho! His Majesty chuckled dryly, and turned to look at Yun Xiaoyao, chuckling as he said, I say, brother, your son's teaching method is rather unique. My heir to the throne. Does he need to understand the deeper meaning of keeping the bow, when the birds are done, when the birds are done, when the birds are done? Yun Xiaoyao's expression had long changed as well. He was speechless as he stared at Yun Yang with eyes that looked like they were about to devour him whole, as if they were about to swallow him whole. Look at what you're teaching. There's a deeper meaning to it. If you're so capable, you can just ascend to the heavens. Can this bow when the birds are done be taught? I know you don't care about the imperial power, but you shouldn't have agreed to it in the beginning. Since you've agreed, you should have taught him well. Now that you've done this, what are you trying to do? Yun Yang was the only one in the banquet who was unperturbed. He smiled and said, Bauer has a good memory. Not bad at all. This is it. Do you still remember what I said the other day when I taught him? What does it mean exactly? If you can repeat it clearly, Uncle will reward you. Everyone turned to look at her, and their faces were full of encouragement. They looked at Bauer, but in reality, everyone's hearts were in their throats. The question was too sensitive, especially now, when the entire continent was silent, with only the Empire of Yutong standing out. The situation was gradually becoming clearer. The Empire of Yutong was about to unify the world and pacify Tianxian. At this sensitive juncture, there was not enough time to reward and encourage promotions to win over the hearts of the people. Why did he want to keep the bow when the birds were done? Even if the imperial mind was a compulsory subject for royalty, this was too disgusting. There was nothing more chilling than this. She said excitedly, That day, Uncle told me the story of this saying. It's about how after a hunter hunts, he hides his hunting tools. As for the deeper meaning of this saying, there are two layers to it. One is to the king. To a king, this saying is derogatory. It shows that he is despicable and useless. The other layer is to the officials. To the officials who have sacrificed everything, this saying is the greatest tragedy. At this point, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. It looked like this bastard Yun Yang still had a bottom line. His words were neither crude nor crude. His Majesty's drunken eyes flashed with a hint of sharpness. He warmly said, that is a good way to put it. Bow, please continue. I will listen to your uncle's words. Yun Xiaoyao clenched his teeth and glared at Yun Yang, but the latter did not take it to heart. He smiled as if he did not feel anything. Of course, Bao could not discern the true meaning in the emperor's words. He thought about it and said, Uncle said that this saying isn't a good thing most of the time. If it's not used in one's entire life, it's a great kindness. It's the same for others and oneself, but it's also a matter of sentiment. Then he asked me, who is the most respectable person in this world? The emperor nodded. Then, who does Bao think is the most respectable person in this world? His Majesty hoped that Bao would give this title to him. It could satisfy his vanity, and also give him a great sense of achievement. He could also use this as an excuse to get out of this predicament. He was already the most respectable person in this world. He could overlook the slight bias in Yun Yang's teaching. Bauer said, I told Uncle then that the most respectable people are the heroes who give up their lives to kill the enemy on the battlefield. His Majesty sighed inwardly, but he felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Oh, Bauer said. That's what Bauer said. Uncle said that Bauer was right. The most respectable people are these heroes. Without their sacrifice, how can there be peace in this world? However, if there's a day in the future when the world is truly at peace, and these heroes have no war to fight, will they still be the most respectable people? His Majesty's hawk-like gaze sliced at Yun Yang and said, This is a problem. What does Bauer think? Bauer said, Bauer thinks that these people are still the most respectable people. They've already fought the war they need to fight, so of course they're respectable. Besides, because of their existence, we're even less afraid of war. His Majesty smiled happily and said, Bauer is right. And then, Uncle said that I'm right too. He then told me that heroes should always be treated like heroes. He told me to always think about the saying, the good bow is set aside when the birds are gone, and not to forget my original intention. Bauer said. Black lines appeared on everyone's foreheads, and they all started coughing. F***ck, they had finally gotten around it. Why were they back at it now? This was simply, Fang Qingtian and Xiao Jianhan felt like there were nails in their buttocks. They could hardly conceal their uneasiness. The issue was already grave when they discussed it in private, but it was even more thrilling when they discussed it in front of the emperor. Bauer's childish voice spoke methodically. Now, the Empire of Yutong is about to unify the world. Once it's unified, we'll have to face the problem of setting aside the good bow when the birds are gone. What he said was exactly what Xiao Jianhan, and Fang Qingtian were feeling. Yes, if the world were to be unified, then the ones who would be in the most awkward position would undoubtedly be these soldiers who had given up everything, and even their lives. How should they be resettled? How could they not forget their original intention? Soldiers, especially outstanding ones, were the proudest and most valiant of all. If they were to be rewarded based on their contributions, each of them would have a considerable amount of merit. However, such people would hardly have a place to use their skills after occupying a high position. How could they be resettled after that? How could they last for long? If they could not be resettled, what would happen if they did not last for long? This was an extremely serious problem. The more profound thought was almost obvious, and no one could overlook it. However, a considerable portion of these people were destined to become unstable factors. There was no doubt about this. There was no benefit in avoiding it. The emperor's gaze was still sharp as he said, "Bao continue." Bao said, "Uncle said, the good bough is set aside when the birds are gone." It's a very good saying. Since it's a good bough, it should be kept well. When the time comes to use it, it doesn't have to be cooked after the cunning hare is dead. Chapter 773. The birds are gone, but it's only temporary. Since they're birds, they're destined to fly here and there. It's an inextinguishable nature. As for hiding a good bough, it's more about a good bough. A good bough is a good bough. Of course, we have to hide and maintain a good bough, so that it doesn't lose its combat power. It's not that we don't want to use it, but it's so that we can kill the birds better the next time. Bao said, "Uncle said that this must be done, but it's also a matter of method. For example, if we hide a good bough, what if we don't take good care of it, and it goes moldy? Therefore, at the same time, how could he keep the bough in its best condition? This is what we need to do the most." After he finished speaking, everyone present fell silent. His Majesty stroked his beard deep in thought. His gaze flickered, but the hidden anger and sharpness on his face had vanished completely. Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian were also deep in thought. This was a problem that needed to be considered carefully. If a soldier slacked off after the war, it would be difficult for him to regain his reputation as a good bough. This would be detrimental to the country and the soldiers themselves. At this moment, Yun Yang had used the young child's mouth to raise the inevitable sharp question and pointed out a direction that everyone could accept. It was painstaking, meaningful, and tempting. The problem now was the specific grasp of this established direction. There was no longer the atmosphere that could have been at daggers drawn like before. Yun Yang sat on the side, maintaining a nonchalant smile. He toasted Ling Xiaozui, clinked glasses with Duge Chou, drank with Xiao Xiaoqing, and winked at Ji Lingxi and Shengguan Lingxiu, trying to act cool. His Majesty pondered for a moment and said, "Bao, did your Uncle Yun say how to hide the good bough when the birds are gone? What should I do exactly?" Yun Yang was sitting here, but the emperor did not ask him but Bao. The meaning behind his question was clear. Bao blinked and said in a wrong tone, "Uncle asked Bao to think about the follow-up question myself, but he didn't give an answer. He said that this was homework." Bao had to use this question to write 3 large sheets of paper, and he had to be satisfied before it was over. The emperor laughed heartily. "Have you finished writing?" Bao lowered her head and said in shame, "I haven't finished writing yet." The emperor asked, "Then how do you plan to write it?" Bao's childish face showed a thoughtful expression. He said, "Based on what Uncle said, this bough, no matter how you take care of it and hide it, with the passage of time, it will inevitably rust and rot. Only by using it often can it be as good as new." Based on this premise, Bao thought and thought, thinking about how to hide it and use it without hiding it. The emperor's entire body trembled, and he murmured, "Since it's hidden, can it be used without hiding?" Bao said innocently. Bao thought about it for a long time and still couldn't figure it out. The original intention of hiding it is to not use it, and not using it now is still not using it. Using it without hiding it is already a contradiction. Then Bao thought, why don't I just not hide it? A bow isn't only used to shoot birds. Since it's a bow and arrow, other than shooting birds in the sky, it can also shoot tigers, wolves, foxes, rabbits. If it doesn't work, it can also shoot mice, longworms, and so on. The emperor's eyes glinted as he murmured, it can also shoot tigers, wolves, mice. For a moment he was lost in thought, speechless. Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian looked at each other and smiled. Suddenly, they felt a great sense of relief. Bao'er's words had vaguely hinted at two different solutions. To Bao'er, keeping it and using it without hiding it were polar opposites that could not coexist. However, to the courtiers and politicians, there was a huge room for maneuver. As for shooting tigers, wolves, and all the animals in the world, there was an unimaginable trend of extension. His words hit the nail on the head, and the meaning was profound. The two important figures could not help chortling in unison. "Congratulations, Your Majesty! Congratulations, Your Majesty!" His Majesty shook his head, the smile on his face growing. Suddenly he guffawed. Ha 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 ha. The three of them raised their goblets at the same time. His Majesty's voice was very loud. "I'm really very happy today. I must get drunk with my two old brothers. We won't go home until we're drunk." Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian said happily. "This official would like to get drunk today as well. We will definitely accompany Your Majesty with our lives, and won't go home until we're drunk." The three of them downed their goblets. Then, they began to raise their goblets at a high frequency, their spirits soaring. They were indescribably excited and high-spirited. The emperor raised his goblet and suddenly said, "Bao'er, how much of what we've said just now do you really understand?" Bao'er blinked and said, "Uncle said that it's fine as long as the hero's heart isn't broken." The emperor let out a long laugh that could shatter the roof tiles. "Ha ha ha, good good good." After saying good 3 times, he suddenly raised his goblet and said loudly, "What a great young master, Yin Yang. I would like to propose a toast to you today." Yin Xiaoyao was relieved and said with a smile, "This bastard only knows how to talk. He's not worthy of your toast. Brother, please don't spoil him." The emperor shook his head. No, no, no. I propose this goblet of wine willingly and willingly." Yin Yang laughed and raised his goblet. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I shall drink as much as Your Majesty drinks today." The emperor was even more delighted when he heard that. Without another word, he downed his goblet in one gulp. Towards the end of the drinking session, not only was His Majesty drunk, Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian were also tipsy. However, the laughter never stopped and the atmosphere was extremely joyous. Even when he helped the emperor onto the dragon carriage for his return, he was still shouting, "Bring the wine! I'm happy today. I won't stop until I'm drunk. I won't return until I'm drunk." It looked like he was really drunk and needed to return. Residents of Yin Yang looked at the little fellow with a dark expression. "Who taught you to say these words?" Bao'er looked up and said, "Other than the hero not being broken, Uncle should not be. Uncle must always be happy. That is what makes Bao'er the happiest." Yin Yang looked at Bao'er in silence and said softly, "Don't show off your intelligence too much. That's what makes a good child." Obviously, Bao'er's precociousness had far exceeded Yin Yang's expectations. Yin Yang could already foresee that if Bao'er remained like this, perhaps he would have to hand over his title of supreme wit to him in the future. Bao'er nodded vigorously. "Bao'er remembers every word Uncle says seriously. I dare not forget it." He raised his head and said softly, "But Uncle will leave Bao'er sooner or later, won't he?" He lowered his head and said, "Bao'er can't bear to leave Uncle." Yin Yang was silent for a moment and patted Bao'er's head. He wanted to say something, but did not say anything in the end. These days, Yin Yang had been keeping Li Yingqiu and the others under strict control. Whoever came into contact with Bao'er and what they said were under his surveillance at every moment. It could be said that there were no blind spots. There was indeed no one to teach him. Then did Bao'er think of these words himself? Thinking of Bao'er's young face, Yin Yang's gaze froze. There was joy and sorrow. How many people say that I explain too much, so I leave it to everyone to understand. Chapter 774. That night, Yin Yang lay in his room, watching the dark night outside through the window. His gaze flickered as he pondered. After a long time he murmured, "Bao'er, right now he can already sit on the position of crown prince. He's more than qualified. Yun Yang was not the only one who had such thoughts. The next morning, without another word, the emperor immediately issued an edict. The mediocre king is not to remain in the capital any longer. He is to head to his fief immediately. This mediocre king was the title of the former crown prince, the current second prince. Compared to Bauer's youthful wisdom, the title of the former crown prince, and the current mediocre king, was also appropriate. The next imperial edict was to confer the title of the first prince's son, Yu Qingquan, as the crown prince's grandson. The whole nation will celebrate, and the world will be pardoned. The civil and military officials accepted the decree in unison. Now that Yutong's conquest was in full swing, it looked like it was about to conquer the world. Conferring the title of national heir at this point in time would remove all future worries. His Majesty's swift and decisive style was on full display. That afternoon, the mediocre king departed with only 808 men in his entourage, leaving Tianting City, the capital of Yutong. Wu Ying of the Ministry of Military Affairs had specifically requested that the mediocre king's ceremonial procession be approved by the Board of Rights, and that the Ministry of Military Affairs had to go through it again to prevent any unruly individuals from sneaking in. The Ministry of Rights naturally did not dare to delay. After the approval, it was immediately sent to the Ministry of War. Wu Ying personally took charge of the matter and did not slack in the slightest. He strictly controlled the entire process, eliminating all irrelevant personnel, including the liangdi, the palace maids, the mediocre king's concubines, the accompanying eunuchs and the guards. He only managed to gather a small number of people, including the mediocre king himself. There were exactly 809 of them. Thus, he immediately ordered them to set out. 809. When the mediocre king found out about the head count, he stared blankly for a long while. Only after a long while, as if he had come to a realization, did he throw his head back and let out a bitter laugh. Then with a sudden wah, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ha ha ha. 809, 809. Was this retribution? Ha ha ha. In front of the gate, there were only a few officials who came out to send them off. Instead, it was the Minister of Justice Wu Lai, who had always been at odds with the mediocre king, who came out to send them off. The mediocre king was dressed in green robes as he turned to look at the city gates. His handsome face was filled with desolation and despair as he fell to his knees and kowtowed 9 times towards the city gates. Imperial Father, I will never be able to see you again after today. Tears streamed down the mediocre king's face as he said, May you take care of yourself and live a long life. Consort Yong comforted him gently. Your Highness, although this journey is long, it's not impossible for us to return to the capital in the future. You shouldn't be discouraged and unable to recover from this setback. The mediocre king shook his head sadly, unwilling to say another word. He boarded the carriage and headed south. No one understood better than him why his entourage was so small, and why were there 809 people. Even if they were demoted, even if the monkeys would scatter when the tree falls, even if they hit them when they were down, how could they only have a guard of honor of 800 people? Where did the escorting soldiers go? Even if only the people from the original crown prince's residence followed him, there would be more than 800 of them. However, these 808 people reminded the former crown prince of something that he had not heard of for a long time. During the battle at Tianxian Cliff, when the 9 Supremes met with misfortune, there were also 809 people accompanying them. The 9 Supremes had brought along 800 guardians. 808 people had died in the battle at Tianxian Cliff. It was almost a complete wipeout. Supreme Cloud was the only survivor. Even though he had stirred up a storm upon his return, the 9 Supremes had remained hidden behind the scenes. Ever since then, the 9 Supremes had remained hidden behind the scenes, be it those who had sacrificed themselves or those who had survived. Now that he had been demoted, the number of people accompanying him, including himself, was coincidentally 809. What did this mean? What did it mean? The mediocre king knew better than anyone else. His entourage was doomed. There would be no more fluke. There would never be a survivor like Supreme Cloud. Since the other party had made such an arrangement, They must have clearly confirmed that he was involved in the incident at Tianxian Cliff. Thinking deeper, the number of people accompanying him was the final approval of the Board of Military. Did this not mean that there were more problems? This was definitely not an accident or a coincidence. It was a dead end, a path to hell, or perhaps a path of no return. These 800 people were all his confidants. All of them were his loyal followers. These 800 people were his burial objects. Not a single one of them would survive. This was a foregone conclusion. 3 days later, the mediocre king and his entourage passed by Songlong Ridge. They set up camp and rested there that night. It was midnight when a strong wind blew, accompanied by thunder and lightning, and a torrential downpour. The next morning, no one came out from the campsite. It was unusually quiet. When the local officials received the news and went to investigate, they saw that there were 809 corpses lying neatly on the ground in the entire campsite. There were no exceptions. They were arranged neatly and clearly. The one at the front was the mediocre king himself. It was as if the 809 people had fallen asleep. In the tent, there were 4 words written by the mediocre king himself. "You deserve it." On a rock next to the tent, someone had written a few lines of words in blood. "When a prince breaks the law, he shall be punished the same as the people. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth. When the grudge is settled, the debt of blood shall be paid in blood." At this moment, in a roadside and 300 miles away from Songlong Ridge, a skinny young man had ordered a few jars of wine and a few side dishes, eating and drinking quietly. After a long time he murmured, "Big Brother Supreme Wind, I, Shui Wuyin, am a man of my word. I have avenged you." He lowered his head quietly, looking at the wine in his bowl and chuckling bitterly. Lord Supreme Cloud meant to kill only the mediocre king, not the innocent. But I couldn't hold it in. I didn't want to kill just one person. I only wanted to kill 809 people. He laughed out loud. How satisfying. He stood up abruptly and threw down 2,000 silver taels, buying all the wine in the inn. Then, he poured them all onto the ground laughing. He knelt before the fragrant wine stains on the floor and kowtowed a few times. His green robe fluttered as he left. The Board of Military. Wu Ying's courtyard. "Sir Wu, your humble servant has failed in his task. I've come to accept my punishment." Oh, by the time your humble servant arrived, His Highness the mediocre king and his entourage of 809 people were all dead. No one survived. It's written on the rock next to the tent. When a prince breaks the law, he shall be punished the same as the people. Blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth. When the grudge is settled, the debt of blood shall be paid in blood. These 24 words in blood indicate that someone has made their move in advance. Sir, what should we do? Seal. Your humble servant understands. Go. Your humble servant shall take his leave. The man in black retreated out of the tent. Wu Ying paced slowly to the window. Looking at the moon in the sky, he suddenly heaved a long sigh of relief and murmured, "Dead." A cloud drifted over, blocking the moonlight. The sky was filled with a haze. I've purposely given the order 2 hours later. Someone has indeed made their move in advance. Chapter 775. Almost at the same time, the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld, their masters, and the last 2 remaining gold-ranked assassins were gathered in a gloomy valley. Who else could it be other than Yun Yang, who stood in front of the concourse of the underworld in a fluttering purple robe? When I was investigating Sister Land's whereabouts the other day, I accidentally discovered that the condensed yin energy here was different from usual. Yun Yang stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the other side of the mountain range in the shadows. Out of curiosity, I investigated and accidentally discovered that there was a dense and massive amount of yin energy hidden under this mountain range. After careful investigation, I confirmed that there was indeed a massive amount of yin energy here, and it was controlled by a mechanism. In other words, this place was man-made. However, yin energy is not necessary for my cultivation method, and I can't convert it into my own cultivation base or combat power. It's like sitting on a mountain of treasure, but it's hard to put it to use. It was only after I befriended King Qingguang that I realized that this yin energy is an excellent resource that the concourse of the underworld needs. To confirm this, I went here again to search for the source of the mechanism. As expected, I found the opening, and I can basically say with certainty. Yin Yang said faintly, "This place should be another haunting temple." Haunting temple? Upon hearing this, the eyes of the kings of the 10 kings brightened, their expressions inexplicably excited. That day, their cultivation base had greatly improved because they had entered the haunting temple by chance and obtained a large amount of yin energy. It was also because of this that they were fated to be with the 9 supremes. If this place was really the haunting temple, then it was related to the 9 supremes. Thinking of this, the expressions of the kings were unusually complicated, and they were speechless for a long time. The leader of the concourse of the underworld was a man in black, shrouded in a faint but solid fog. His cultivation base was obviously higher than that of the 10 Yama kings. This person was the true master of the concourse of the underworld, the master of the 10 kings of the 10 palaces, whom Yin Yang had never met. His expression was solemn as he slowly walked forward, looking for the key of the mechanism. As expected, according to what Yin Yang had said, he found an inconspicuous protruding rock somewhere. The man in black didn't delay or hesitate. He circulated his qi and pressed it down. A moment later, a series of light sounds rang out, and a large hole suddenly appeared in front of him. The hole that had suddenly appeared was not very big, at most the size of a bedroom. It was filled with an extremely dark and ghostly aura, a sinister atmosphere that kept people away from it. However, the people from the concourse of the underworld were overjoyed when they saw it. It was because the dark and empty space was clearly a dark fog that was close to materializing. Upon closer inspection, they could see that at the end of the dark fog, there were 10 luminous pearls hanging in the air, emitting a dense fog. "That's right, this is the other haunting temple," First Court King Qingguang exclaimed in delight. Although the concourse of the underworld is known as the leader of the world's top 3 assassin organizations, ultimately, it's hard to live up to our reputation. Most of it stems from the people's fear of our gloomy aura. That day when the 10 of them were promoted, it was their fate. And they even benefited from the help of a few venerable ones led by Lord Supreme Earth. The haunting temple is hidden beneath the earth. Earth is the earth, the head of the 9 supremes. In order not to forget this kindness, from today onwards, I shall change my name to Xidagarba. The master of the kings of the 10 palaces turned around and bowed deeply to Yin Yang with a solemn expression. "Senior, you don't have to do this." Yin Yang was stunned by the sudden change, not knowing how to react. "Since I've done what I've done, I've made up my mind. Supreme Cloud need not worry." Xidagarba sucked in a deep breath and turned his head to say, "The 10 of you, cover the 10 abyssal essence pearls with your right hands according to your respective positions. Circulate your qi with all your might to open the haunting temple." The kings of the 10 palaces answered and stepped forward. Each of them took a deep breath and extended a hand to cover the 10 abyssal essence pearls. It was probably not the first time they had done this with all their might, so the process was smooth without any hiccups. As far as the eye could see, the abnormally thick fog of the underworld seemed to have gone berserk, growing thicker and thicker in the blink of an eye. Even with Yin Yang's eyesight, he could not see his own fingers, even if he stretched them out. This went on for a while before the valley was suddenly plunged into an atmosphere of violent tremors. For a moment, the mountains shook and the earth quaked, as if an earth dragon was flipping over. However, everyone present was extremely powerful. To them, this little bit of noise was not a big deal at all. The tremors only lasted for a moment, until the center of the empty space surrounded by the 10 abyssal essence pearls slowly collapsed, and the tremors gradually stopped. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on a huge pitch-black palace that gradually revealed itself before their eyes. Suddenly, a few words darker than the darkness flashed across. "Haunting Temple of the Heavens." The palace's doors slowly opened after the black words flashed past. The interior of the palace was even darker, leading straight to the underground. No one knew how deep it was. Xidagarba, master of the 10 court Yama kings, took a deep breath and said solemnly, "I thank young Master Yin for your help once again. However, young master, and our help has reached its limit. This realm can only be entered by those who cultivate the ethereal force. It will only bring harm to young master, and we won't be able to come out in a short period of time. Therefore, please take care, young master. We shall meet again. I look forward to the day we meet again, young master." Yun Yang said. Yin Yang understands. Everyone, please do as you please. As the senior has said, we will definitely meet again in the future. The 10 court kings stepped forward one by one to bid farewell to Yun Yang, each of them exuding a sense of reluctance to part. Among them, first court king Qingguang was the most prominent. He was the first to meet Yun Yang, and had interacted with him the most. This king was the most straightforward, so seeing that Yun Yang was about to leave, he nagged for a long time. Just as the concourse of the underworld was about to enter the haunting temple, and draw a temporary halt to their journey, a voice suddenly rang out. "Wait!" Everyone turned to look at the source of the voice, their hearts alarmed. Could there be someone spying on them somewhere else? Murderous intent permeated the air. Combined with the aura of the netherworld, even the real flurry of ghosts would not be as strong as this. The 10 court kings and Xitigarbha stared at the source of the voice with unprecedented sharpness. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, two silhouettes flew over from the shadows in the distance. As they approached, they saw that the newcomers were the two assassin leaders, Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan. The concourse of the underworld, the Hall of Crimson Blade, and the Merciless Tower. The three top assassin organizations in the world had been at each other's throats for a long time. Now that they had met, it went without saying that they were exceptionally jealous. First Court King Qingguang pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword and said eerily, "What are you doing here? Are you intending to borrow our hands to go to the underworld?" As they spoke, they had led each other to the extreme. In spite of this, Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan were calm and composed, without a hint of hostility. They first greeted Yun Yang before speaking to Xitigarbha sternly. "The two of us have come here with the intention of joining the concourse of the underworld and being apprenticed to Senior. I wonder if Senior is willing to accept us?" Chapter 776. Both of you want to join the concourse of the underworld? You want to be apprenticed to our master? First Court King Qingguang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets when he heard the answer. It was not only King Qingguang. The other 9 court Yama kings were in disbelief as well. Even Yun Yang was dumbfounded, not knowing what was going on. What was going on? The leader of the Merciless Tower, the leader of the Hall of Crimson Blade, the masterminds of 2 major assassin organizations. Any one of them was higher in status than Emperor Song, the head of the 10 court Yama kings. They were probably only slightly below the Yama king's master, Xitigarbha. Even though the 2 organizations had suffered a great loss in strength, they should not have to rely on others. But these 2 people said these words under the watchful eyes of the crowd. How could it not cause people to be extremely astonished and indescribably shocked? I know that our words are hard to convince, but we're sincere in wanting to join the concourse of the underworld. To show our sincerity, both of us are willing to make a heaven's oath. If we violate it, we'll be doomed eternally, Hen Bieli said sincerely, looking at the crowd's expressions. Why? Even someone as experienced and steady as Xitigarbha could not help but feel curious. These 3 words could be said to be the voice of everyone present. Making a heaven's oath was not a joke. It was a promise that could not be faked. Hong Zhan and Hen Bieli would basically be tied to the concourse of the underworld for the rest of their lives from now on. The price they had to pay was actually negligible. However, how could these 2 men make such a decision? If it was only to gain the trust of others, they did not have to go to such lengths. Hen Bieli chuckled bitterly. I know what we're saying sounds absurd and hard for anyone to believe. However, after the battle in Tiantang City, we brothers have been blinded by greed. We've set our minds on the Dragonhide treasure map without a care in the world. Because of this, the entire Tianxian continent's assassin base has been destroyed in this battle. Although Hen Bieli's tone was bitter, his articulation was unusually clear. There was no hesitation. It was obvious that he had thought about this matter many times during this period of time. The assassin industry in Tianxian continent can be said to have reached the lowest point of its history. It's almost hopeless. Both of us have let down the ancestors of the assassin world. Hong Zhang continued. Throughout the entire continent, the only assassin organization whose structure is still intact is the Concourse of the Underworld. Big Brother and I have discussed it. For the rest of our lives, we don't seek to restore the glory of the past. We just want to preserve the lifeline of the assassin business. That's good enough. Based on this, although it seems absurd for us to join the Concourse of the Underworld, it is in fact the best choice for us. As long as we join the Concourse of the Underworld, not only will our own safety be guaranteed, the families of the brothers who eat with us will also have a source of income. Of course, the most important thing is to let the profession of assassins continue to exist in Tianxian Jianghu. Hen Bieli nodded, his eyes gleaming with deep emotion. I don't want the profession of assassins to go into decline. I'm not trying to be sentimental when I say that. Although we're down and out and have a lot of enemies, with our capabilities and heritage, it's not difficult for us to seek a peaceful life. We are all assassins, so we naturally know that although we are assassins who pay for our lives, it is still a profession passed down from generation to generation. Assassins are the hands that hold the power of life and death. Perhaps the people of the entire continent will not approve of it, and may even want us to get rid of it as soon as possible. However, this hand that holds the power of life and death cannot be lost from our hands, and we are unwilling to see this profession disappear from the world. Therefore, our visit today is not to seek cooperation, but to join. We are willing to make the heaven's oath. This is our sincerity, and also the biggest guarantee we can give. Hen Bieli was dressed in white while Hong Zhan was dressed in black. Both of them stood like javelins, waiting for Xidagarba and the 10 kings to reply. Xidagarba frowned and said, I completely believe what all of you have said. However, when it comes to joining the Concourse of the Underworld, it can't be concluded with just a few words. Everything else is fine, but all of you are the pinnacle powerhouses of this world, and your cultivation has formed its own system. The Concourse of the Underworld's cultivation, on the other hand, is unique, different from all the cultivation methods in the entire continent. This point alone has already negated the possibility of all of you wanting to join the Concourse of the Underworld. Let me ask you something. If you wish to join the Concourse of the Underworld, you will need to cultivate from the beginning, cultivating a cultivation method that is completely different from your original cultivation method. In other words, the profound cultivation base you possess is now the biggest obstacle for you to join the Concourse of the Underworld. Not only will those cultivation bases not be of any benefit to the Concourse of the Underworld's unique skill, they will greatly harm you instead. Are you really willing to give up your cultivation base and cultivate from the beginning? This question made the 10 kings of the Concourse of the Underworld frown, all of them smiling bitterly. Xidagarba's words had hit the nail on the head. It was sharp and even harsh, but it was also an unavoidable point. If they could not reach a consensus on this point, no matter how much sincerity Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan displayed, it would all be nonsense. However, asking these pinnacle powerhouses to cripple their own cultivation base and cultivate from the beginning with a single sentence? This was no different from a fool's dream. At the very least, the 10 kings of the underworld would never be willing to cripple their own cultivation base and cultivate from the beginning. We're willing. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Hen Bieli and Hong Zhan agreed without hesitation. The group was speechless for a long while. Did they really agree? Why did they agree just like that? Did they have to agree so readily? Senior Rong Bing, the reason we agreed to cripple our own cultivation base and cultivate from the beginning is no doubt to express our sincerity, but it is also out of selfishness. As the pinnacle cultivators of this world, we know ourselves best. How could we not know that our cultivation method has no higher inheritance? Our cultivation path can be said to be cut off. Although we have yet to reach the pinnacle, we are already far away from it. However, if we continue on and set foot on the pinnacle, we will only be further away from the true path of cultivation. Looking at this world, to surpass the limits of this world, only the complete cultivation method of the concourse of the underworld can allow us to go further and set foot on a higher level. Henbieli was slightly embarrassed as he said, "In fact, this is the main reason we are here this time." "I see." Xidagarba frowned in deep thought and said, "If that's the case, the concourse of the underworld can accept you. But you still have to make a heavenly oath. After joining the concourse of the underworld, you must cripple your entire cultivation base before you can switch to cultivating the concourse of the underworld's cultivation method. As long as you fulfill these two requirements, I will allow you to join the concourse of the underworld and grant you the position of guardian." Henbieli and Hongzhan exchanged glances and nodded immediately. They then knelt on the spot and made the heavenly oath. Then, they kowtowed 3 times and kowtowed 9 times to Xidagarba, meticulously performing the ritual of acknowledging him as their master. "Both of you joining the concourse of the underworld is to continue the profession of assassins. The concourse of the underworld controls the life and death of the world, so the two of you will be in charge." Xidagarba said, "The two of you, one in black and one in white, will take up these 2 positions, black and white impermanence. Once the impermanence appears, there is only death and no life." "Yes." Chapter 777. Watching the people of the concourse of the underworld enter the haunting temple in a single file. The fog-shrouded door slowly closed. Then, the entire mountain trembled as the haunting temple sank into the ground, never to be seen again. Yin-Yang was speechless. Even as intelligent as he was, he would never have dreamed that something like this would happen. Henbieli, Hongzhan, the merciless tower master, and the leader of Crimson Blade Hall, had been taken in by the concourse of the underworld, just like that. They had taken the initiative to seek refuge. No matter how high-sounding and sincere the 2 men's reasons were, Yin-Yang still felt that something was amiss. These reasons did not seem to be sufficient for Henbieli and Hongzhan to make such a decision. What was the reason, though? Yin-Yang could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. "Alright, forget it. We've been delayed for so long. Finally, there's nothing to do for now. Let's go to the battlefield in the west quickly. Don't let any accidents happen." Yin-Yang turned into a storm and soared into the sky, heading west. "Henbieli, what's the real reason?" "The real reason is very simple. It's when I've cultivated to the peak recently, trying to break through to a higher level. While I was meditating, someone kept saying, 'Life and death are fated. There's only the concourse of the underworld. If you wish to live forever, go straight to hell.'" Henbieli chuckled bitterly. "It's like a call from fate. At first, we thought it was an illusion, a devil in our hearts, but Hongzhan had received the same message as well. He believed the message to be true. Furthermore, after the 2 of us verified it again and again, we confirmed that the message wasn't from an outsider, but an inexplicable thought that came from our own hearts. It was real. We've discussed it for a long time before we finally decided to look for you. Then why didn't you say it outside? Actually, we've been here for a few days. We've seen you snatch the Dragonhide treasure map with our own eyes. We've also seen you return the treasure map to young Master Yin. We know that this is actually young Master Yin's setup. Regardless of the cause of this incident, young Master Yin has saved our lives, but all in all, we're quite conflicted. We're even worried that this is a secret that belongs only to the concourse of the underworld. If we were to reveal it, and it turns out to be something you've kept a secret. So it's quite complicated." First Court King Qingguang and the rest burst into laughter, looking at Henbieli and Hongzhan's conflicted expressions. He finally understood the complicated feelings in the hearts of these 2 fellows. If it was him, facing such a situation, he would also inevitably feel conflicted. "Then do you hate young Master Yin?" "If I say that I don't hate at all, then I'm just fooling myself. There must be a little bit." Sigh, as long as I think about how I've fallen into someone's scheme, how I've been trapped for my entire life, how I've fought until the very end, and how I've died, and how I've had to thank the instigator for his kindness, and leave with 1,000 thanks, my heart. Ha ha ha. I had wanted to get rid of the former crown prince, the mediocre king. Who would have thought that I would be a step too late? To think that the former crown prince has already been slaughtered. Sigh. Hen Bieli heaved a long sigh. Actually, when we saw this fellow die, we suddenly felt an emptiness in our hearts. We didn't know what to do in the future. That's why we were so resolute. That's what he said, Hong Zhan said from the side. The spirits are stirring. We're here. Xidagarba's eyes flashed. Everyone stopped in their tracks. They looked at the spacious hall in front of them, at the endless ghastly fog that gushed out of it. Concourse of the underworld's positions are tentatively set at 15. Xidagarba sucked in a deep breath, thinking of the many positions in the concourse of the underworld's legacy. He could not help murmuring in his heart, there's still a long way to go. It was the same day that Wang Yunju had led the 400,000-strong army into the empire of Zio's territory. Millions of miles of land and rivers were in full bloom as the flames of war spread. Wherever Yutong's western army passed, they were invincible. There was no contest. They were undefeatable and undefeatable. However, Wang Yunju, the marshal who guarded the western front and had fought against the empire of Zio for more than a decade, was utterly confused. Why is the empire of Zio's combat power so weak? Marshal Wang scratched his head from a high point on his horse, looking perplexed. Then, where did Zio's army that fought me and made me cry out in agony go to? Am I dreaming? Or is Zio's army suffering from somnambulism? Why do I remember that Zio has quite a number of experienced marshals? Where have they gone? This is a war that will annihilate a nation, a true annihilation of its people. Are they really not coming? Perhaps your father has been scaring himself all these years, thinking that the other party is a tiger, but they're all F*** paper tigers? It was a pity that no one could answer Wang Yunju's questions. In fact, the generals around him were filled with doubt, confusion, and even awkwardness. It was understandable that they were puzzled. After all, even the marshal was behaving like this. How could his subordinates be spared? What was the awkwardness about? This was a battle that Yutong had publicly acknowledged as a war that would annihilate a nation. It concerned Yutong's peace and Tianquan's prosperity for years to come. The Western Front's 400,000-strong army was full of vigor, but they were mostly cautious, afraid that they would fall into the enemy's trap if they were careless. After all, the Western Front had fought with Zio for years and knew Zio's army well. It was one thing to think that they would win, but it was another to be cautious. However, when both sides engaged in battle, Zio's army either crumbled at the first contact or surrendered right away. The defeated army was like a landslide. The sincerity of their surrender was so obvious that it made one feel suspicious. The Western Front's vanguard general, Sun Zihu, quickly came to a conclusion. This was a trap. Although the battle was going smoothly, Sun Zihu did not dare to advance too recklessly. They had already won a great victory, but they still sent out countless scouts every day, afraid that they would fall into Zio's trap. It was only after Wang Yunju's arrival that he came to a conclusion, after analyzing the previous battles and the current information. Zio's army was not faking their defeat, nor was it arrogant, nor was it a ploy. They had truly been defeated, a complete and utter defeat. Strictly speaking, Sun Zihu's cautiousness and hesitation had actually delayed the military's plans, giving the empire of Zio a few more days of breathing space. In spite of this, Wang Yunju had to admit that Sun Zihu could not be blamed for this. If this had happened to him, or any other famous general in this world, they would not have dared advance recklessly, without exception. It was because of this mentality that the current situation was awkward. Then the core question arose. Everyone had really fought Zio for so many years. How could Zio have suddenly become so weak? If Heaven's Inquisition was here, he would tell you that if luck was not on your side, you would not even be able to get a mouthful of cold water. Now that the empire of Zio's destiny was gone, of course, everything would be a mess. Disasters, natural and man-made, would befall them all at once. What was there to be afraid of? The truth was more or less as well. The empire of Zio's veteran marshals who were used to war were either embroiled in a coup and could not even fend for themselves, or they had been killed, imprisoned, or dismissed from their posts. It was extremely rare to meet someone who could fight on the battlefield now. Take Sun Zihu's aggressive first battle into the Empire of Zio as an example. Both sides faced each other from afar. Sun Zihu did not dare to be careless, lining up in formation. Just as he was about to launch his attack, the enemy had fallen into disarray. Sun Zihu was someone who knew the art of war. How could he not seize the opportunity to attack? The truth was simple. There had been an internal conflict in the enemy's troop. The enemy's vanguard general had been intimidated by Sun Zihu's army and had fled with his troops. The vanguard general had fled at the last moment. How ridiculous was this? However, it had happened right in front of the two armies. When the two armies were facing off against each other, their own vanguard had fled out of fear. This was a fatal blow to Zio's army's morale. In addition to Sun Zihu's attack, how could Zio's army not be defeated by the two chests, one inside and one outside? Of course, it was a crushing defeat. However, such a victory had come too easily. Sun Zihu dared not advance rashly, listening for information here and there. It was only when Wang Yunju's main force had arrived that he was certain of the situation. However, the situation was completely out of control. On the battlefield, the increasingly absurd battles were happening one after another. 1 to 200 Yutong soldiers were chasing thousands of Zio soldiers like they were chasing rabbits. 10 people were daring enough to attack a 500-man army, and they could even win. 3 to 5 soldiers were escorting hundreds of Zio's captives from afar. Tell me, who can I reason with? Bastards, their entire families are bastards. Marshal Wang Yunju attributed all his frustrations to these 3 words. How can there be any merit to speak of in this situation? Conquering more than half of the empire in less than 3 months. Damn it, if this battle report were to be sent back, would the military believe it? It's fine if they don't believe it, but if they do, they'll scold me to death. F*CKU Wang Yunju, have you been eating sh*T in the West all these years? Facing such an opponent, you're still complaining every day. Your father's reputation has been ruined by these bastards from the Empire of Zio. Faced with such a situation, the Western generals shared the same frustration as their marshal. Being oppressed by such an opponent for so many years, how useless they were in the eyes of others. Chapter 778. No matter what, the reports of victory were coming one after another to Tiantang City. His Majesty stood in the royal study, his arms behind his back as he stood before his eldest son's portrait, his expression bitter. He's gone. Whatever grudge you all had, it should have been resolved by now, right? He whispered softly to his eldest son. Yes, I know, I've always known. But I've never dealt with it. You all are my children. I thought I could strip him of everything, status, glory, pride, and even dignity. I would be able to spare his life, but in the end I didn't. Just like how I couldn't save you. I shouldn't compare myself like this, right? Now that things have come to this, what he owes you has been repaid by your own people. My heart is filled with bitterness. But now, I feel that my heart is finally calmer when I face you again. Because what should have been yours has all been given to your son. Now that the nation is at peace, and the people are loyal to us, the Empire of Zio in the West is about to be annexed by Yutong. My son, if only you could see all of this. If only you could take over everything personally. Your Majesty. It was Qiu Jianhan who had barged in hurriedly. His voice could be heard even before he arrived. Following his loud bellow, the periphery of the palace was plunged into a pin-drop silence. Old Marshal, Eunuch Li, the head of the palace, chased after him with all his might. Old Marshal, please stay. Allow this old servant to report to His Majesty and await your summons. However, Qiu Jianhan had already barged in with large strides, his forehead drenched in sweat. What happened? His Majesty, dressed in a bright yellow robe, was already standing at the door of the royal study. Looking at Qiu Jianhan, who had rushed in, his heart thumping wildly. He was not angry, nor would he be. Qiu Jianhan had always done things with a sense of propriety. Since he had lost his composure and acted like he was in a dire situation, even disregarding his status as an official and barging into the palace, something serious must have happened. This was something that even Qiu Jianhan could not deal with. Thinking about it, His Majesty felt dizzy, his heart beating like a drum, his mouth parched. The last time Qiu Jianhan had lost his composure like this was when the 9 Supremes had fallen. What was it now? The things that Qiu Jianhan could not solve or deal with were usually things that he could not solve himself. What the hell is going on? Mr. Qiu, please slow down for now. Urgent matters must be dealt with, His Majesty asked anxiously, not forgetting to comfort Qiu Jianhan. Of course, this was more to ease the tense atmosphere. 9 Supremes. Supreme Cloud. Qiu Jianhan panted heavily, his forehead drenched in sweat. His vision was a little blurry. His Majesty's heart skipped a beat, almost fainting. He grabbed Qiu Jianhan's hand and asked, "What's wrong with Supreme Cloud?" He could not care less about the internal turmoil anymore. This was related to the 9 Supremes and Supreme Cloud. It was a grave matter that could easily shake the foundation of the nation. Yun after the matter after another. Yun had the Qi Majesty. Yun. Qi. Emperor had by the other day. The other the Emperor. Then the other the another. Yun after another. The by the other hand was. Yun. Majesty's led. Bin. Emperor. By. The yin was. Yin yang. Qiu Jianhan stared at the Emperor. King Xiaoyao's son Yin Yang. How could it be him? This. It really is him. We have always had our suspicions, but we have never thought of really finding out who he is. How could he suddenly be exposed? Qiu Jianhan wiped his sweat away. Now the entire Tiantang city knows. Qiu Jianhan wiped his sweat. Now the entire Tiantang city knows. Who found out about this? The Emperor walked out. Qiu Jianhan followed behind him shouting, "Guards, guards!" Then he followed the Emperor out, wiping his sweat. "It's a mess out there now. Your Majesty, be careful. Don't let anything happen to you at this critical juncture." Along the way, the Emperor of Yutong looked around and realized that the people in the palace seemed to be quiet, but there was a hint of frenzy in their expressions. There was also great shock, as well as an indescribable excitement and admiration. Of course, most of it was a fanaticism of finally seeing a god. Whispers could be heard from afar. "Supreme Cloud is Yin Yang, young Master Yin. Oh my god! Lord Supreme Cloud has been by our side all along. It's been so many years, Lord Supreme Cloud has finally shown himself. We finally know who Lord Supreme Cloud is. Our wish has been fulfilled, but I'd rather not know. Lord Supreme Cloud deserves our gratitude and admiration. But now that his identity has been exposed, the danger he'll have to face will increase tenfold, or even 100-fold. That's right. What do these people mean by making a ruckus? Why did they suddenly reveal Lord Supreme Cloud's identity? Do they have ulterior motives? Or is there another conspiracy? I don't know, but it's not as simple as it seems. It's no longer important to think about the source now. The situation now is a mess, a complete mess. Yes, it was a mess, a complete mess. This was His Majesty's most intuitive thought. Time went back to a day ago. A dozen people had suddenly appeared at the original location of the residence of 9 Supremes. One of them took out a strange object and looked around. Then they found the residence of King Yin. At that time, Yun Yang was searching for the location of the haunting temple with the concourse of the underworld, and did not encounter this group of people. In spite of this, the rumor that Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud appeared at this moment and spread like wildfire. When the 9 Supremes are formed, the world is stable. When the 9 Supremes are united, the world is about to be stabilized. It's only now that we find out that the famous Supreme Cloud is actually Yun Yang of the residence of King Xiaoyao. Young Master Yin, once the number 1 popinjay in Tiantang City. Is this an accident or is this within reason? There's naturally evidence to support the claim that Yun Yang is Supreme Cloud. Firstly, the heavenly mystery strategy in our hands will never be wrong. Although this is a secret technique of the school, and not enough to convince everyone, there are other pieces of evidence that can be found everywhere after a detailed analysis. It's just that not many people have linked it to them in the past. Yun Yang doesn't appear every time Supreme Cloud goes on a mission. Every time young Master Yin appears, Supreme Cloud's mission must have ended. For example, since the formation of the 9 Supremes until now, every mission that the 9 Supremes carried out was dug out for comparison. The time was accurate to every hour of every day. One by one they were compared. After the 9 Supremes incident at Tianxian Cliff, young Master Yin didn't appear for almost half a year. Then where did this young Master Yin go? He must be recuperating. The incident at Tianxian Cliff permanently buried the remaining 8 of the 9 Supremes. Although Supreme Cloud was the only survivor, it's impossible that he wasn't injured. Then there's other evidence, which is, with these pieces of evidence listed, the matter of Yin Yang being Supreme Cloud was almost concluded. During this period of time, the legend of the School of Kismet State had abruptly spread like wildfire and was widely known throughout the world. By the will of heaven, we search for the true dragon, who belongs to the world. The Kismet State is in our hearts. Serve the world and the people. Merit will last for 1,000 years. Emerge in troubled times. Hide in order to save the world. When the world is not peaceful, the school gate will open. Chapter 779. Following the rapid spread of these legends, many people found many ancient books and records to prove that the legend of the School of Kismet State was not just a rumor. For a moment, the entire continent was hit with a sudden realization. So this was the truth. So, there really was a celestial being who could save the world in this world. It turned out that throughout the ages, the wise rulers and overlords of these continents were all chosen by the people of the School of Kismet State from the vast sea of people. It turned out that these people were the ones who truly cared about the world. Every time they appeared, it was not to fight for power or personal desires, but to calm the chaotic world. They were all trying to save the people from the disaster, to solve the problem of the world's fate. Their merit was boundless. The merit of choosing a wise ruler time and time again to calm the chaotic world could not be faked. After so many years, was this not respectable enough? If one did not respect such people, what else could one do? As for them becoming kings and ancestors in the end, they had given so much. So what if they received a little reward? It would be the best for the world to have such a caring person rule the world. Moreover, the School of Kismet State had gone into seclusion immediately after they had chosen a wise ruler, not claiming any credit. This was also the reason why not many people in the continent had heard of their names. How noble they were. Yutong's rulers gritted their teeth in anger at such remarks. We have worked so hard. Millions of warriors have shed their blood on the battlefield. Countless civil and military officials have racked their brains. Generations of people have worked tirelessly to achieve the great situation where we are about to unify the world today. Stand up and flip your lips, and all the credit will belong to you. You are the source, the initiators of everything. How could there be such logic in this world? This was the so-called fallacy of misleading the masses. For a time, Tiantang City was filled with countless ancient books. Many of the rare books that had only been passed down in legends were revealed to the world. Countless scholars began to write books and write biographies of the School of Kismet State, based on the bits and pieces of the books, extolling the praises of the School of Kismet State. The legend of Supreme Cloud, his identity, and the legend of the School of Kismet State were intertwined. The ancient legend and the current myth complemented each other, shocking the people. To the Emperor of Yutong, these series of changes were like all sorts of ghosts and monsters leaping out at the same time, that the world was about to witness the coming of great rule. Each and every one of them was unusually lively. Even with the intervention of the officials, and the Emperor of Yutong's direct statement that he did not care, the popularity did not subside. Instead, it grew more intense and unstoppable. With the sudden turn of events, the front of the residence of King Yin became even more crowded. Countless people rushed over to kowtow, and many even knelt there and refused to leave. Countless people knelt down with every step, as if they were on a pilgrimage, and they knelt all the way here from afar. Lord Supreme Cloud. Young Master Yin Yang is Lord Supreme Cloud. No wonder young Master Yin is so handsome. So he's Lord Supreme Cloud himself. Lord Supreme Cloud is our savior. We must come here and kowtow in gratitude. Otherwise, we would be ungrateful. Under the guidance of such thoughts, people from all over the Empire of Yutong began to gather in Tiantang City. Lord Supreme Cloud does not care about our repayment, but we have received his grace. Even if we are not fated to meet again, we must come and kowtow and take a look at Lord Supreme Cloud's home from afar. Such a view had always existed in the hearts of every Yutong citizen. In the past, they had only tried their best to restrain themselves because they did not know Supreme Cloud's true identity, to prevent any possibility of his identity being exposed. Now that Yutong was about to conquer Tianxian, this concern was greatly reduced. Now that it was triggered by someone with ulterior motives, it formed a tsunami of people. Although the residence of Yin was filled with experts, it was useless no matter how skilled they were when faced with such a situation. We don't have to see Lord Supreme Cloud. As long as we can kowtow to his door, that's good enough. Even if it's just to see the place where Lord Supreme Cloud used to live, it would be a blessing of a lifetime. There would be no more regrets. Yin Xiaoyao could only open the gates of the residence of Yin completely and tidy up Yin Yang's yard for people to visit. This move spread quickly and caused a sensation throughout the country. The number of people who entered the residence of Yin to visit each day exceeded 300,000. In addition, the number of visitors was increasing every day. This kind of situation was really too frightening. The pillows and blankets in Yin Yang's bedroom had turned completely black in just 2 to 3 days. Everyone wanted to touch the pillows and blankets that Lord Supreme Cloud had slept on. Although there were strict prohibitions from the supervisors, there were still those who were bold enough to try and fulfill their wishes, even if it meant risking their lives. Faced with such a situation, everyone was helpless. After all, they could only stop them verbally. How could they actually stop them with force? His Majesty the Emperor was hopping mad at the situation, but he could do nothing about it. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that someone with ulterior motives was making use of Supreme Cloud's name and prestige, using the nation's reverence towards the 9 Supreme's lords to create a commotion. There must be a sinister motive hidden in the depths of his heart. However, faced with the popular sentiment, there was nothing that could be done. The Emperor, Yin Xiaoyao, Qiu Jianhan, Fang Qingtian, and the rest of the empire's higher-ups were all anxious and restless. They were at their wits' end, unable to do anything about it. They knew that the enemy in the dark had ulterior motives, and that the conspiracy was growing, but they could not interfere, and could only let it happen. They knew that the consequences would be unimaginable if this continued, but they could not stop it. How could such a mood not be gloomy? Indifferently, there were still 2 people who were excited about the situation, and even felt proud of it, Ji Lingxi and Shengguan Lingxiu. With the girl's intelligence, they knew that someone was behind this, but their beloved's reputation in the Empire of Yutong could not be faked. How could the 2 ladies not be emotional? It was especially so for Ji Lingxi, who was Supreme Win's younger sister. Seeing the 9 Supremes' prestige in the Empire of Yutong, seeing the people of Yutong rushing over with tears in their eyes, and prostrating themselves to the ground in worship, the agitation she felt had almost caused her heart to explode. This was what my brother had done. This was what Yin Yang had done. They were such great people. They were worthy of everyone's reverence, admiration, and worship. They were also worthy of any good girl's heart, worthy of any precious thing in this world. This is my sweetheart. I want to know where Supreme Cloud has gone now. Immediately. In the palace, the Emperor's face was dark. Opposite him was a dumbfounded Yin Xiaoyao. His Majesty looked at his younger brother of a different mother with a murderous expression, his knuckles cracking as he clenched his fists. He had the urge to beat someone up. Recalling the time when he had discussed Supreme Cloud's identity, Yin Yang, and everything else with him, Yin Xiaoyao's solemn promise was still ringing in his ears. He was not Supreme Cloud. Your younger brother can guarantee it. Your younger brother can guarantee it with so and so. But now the Emperor gritted his teeth. Looking at his stance, His Majesty could devour Yin Xiaoyao bite by bite without doing anything. Cough, cough, cough. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.